Asian longhorn beetles. The following two statements are true. The previous statement is false, and this is the Onion Week in Review. This week, Americans nationwide were stunned to hear horrific allegations on Wall Street revealing that numerous junior bankers have been forced to survive on a mere $6,800 per week. The findings, which implicate numerous high-profile financial institutions such as Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and Citibank, suggest that hundreds of first-year bankers are constantly deprived of basic necessities, including penthouse apartments overlooking Central Park and regular company-financed vacations to the French Riviera.
Many of these bankers are 23 or 24 years old and don't even have access to an expense account of over $50,000 a year. Not only that, but some of them are making as little as 20 times minimum wage. I mean, this is truly disgraceful.
This is the Onion News Network.
You can help spread the ideas of liberty with our Patreon for just $5 per month at amps.freetalklive.com.
Free Talk Live.
This is Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. I'm Gardner Goldsmith, and thanks for listening. You can tune in live every Monday through Friday on Rockfin, Rumble, on YouTube now, and my Twitter/X at Gard Goldsmith. The mothership.
I know it's really tough. The 911 system is down. It's in Massachusetts. What does it say on the phones? It keeps ringing. 911 services are currently down statewide. Delays in public safety response may occur.
So get up and get down. 911 is joking your town. Get up and get down. Late 911, where's the late clown? Get up and get down. 911 is joking your town. Get up and get down. Late 911, where's the late clown?
911 services are currently down statewide. Delays in public safety response may occur.
Yes? Oh, hello. Hello. We're Mary's parents. Oh, well, come on in, fellas. Hold it a second. Mary's parents burned to death last year. Wait a minute. I know you guys. You're from the news flash.
Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel. We had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, give us the tools, we'll do the job. And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
You're from the news flash.
China and Russia are one of the few truly sovereign states in the world right now. Russia and China can say no to the United States. This is what NATO alliance do not like. They do not believe in sovereignty of nation states, and they like to impose their will. And this is what they mean when they say they will impose a cost. They act like the whole world is their sandbox.
You're from the news flash.
They act like the whole world is their sandbox. What a perfectly apt way to say it. And unfortunately, they might also be acting like it's their litter box. So, Benjamin Netanyahu, wasn't that classy? Not only did he demand weapons from you and me, indirectly from, of course, the puppet masters over us who get to pull our strings or we go to jail, those really moral people like Lindsey Graham, Anthony Blinken, those really cool people who control part of our lives and make us fund warfare and the slaughter of innocent people in Gaza, all that continuing quixotic warfare in Ukraine, the buildup of tensions in the Southeast Asia region, and other things like that. Yeah, building nuclear weapons and all that stuff. It's awesome that a few people can make a lot of money off of that stuff. And I hope you feel that warmth inside. Or is it just radiation? I don't know. It's tough to tell sometimes. You know what I'm saying? However, Benjamin Netanyahu, what's super cool is at least he got one thing right. He compared himself to Winston Churchill, who, as I mentioned, spoke at the first World Eugenics Conference. And yes, had secret conversations and communiques with FDR to sucker Americans into thinking that the Japanese were the baddies and that there had to be some U.S. entrance into World War II. So you get that oil embargo, that blockade of Japan, because FDR really cares so much about the Sino-Japanese war and has to get the U.S. involved. That's awesome, even though he ran on a plank of peace. So yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu thinks he's doing himself a favor comparing himself to Winston Churchill, right? Okay, let's dig in a little more, everybody. And for that, let's get into the war theme with time zone. Yeah.
About the sunshine. Speak about the sunshine. Speak about the sunshine. This is a wild.
Oh yes, it's wonderful to know that Netanyahu knows that Israel is America's greatest ally, right? Absolutely, they're not screwing up your life, and you better answer to that. Yes, you better appreciate all the things that Benjamin Netanyahu has done for you. He does and does and does for you. He does double time for you. So it's very important that the United States make sure that they continue to give him weapons, even though, of course, here in the news is this. Israeli airstrike targets aid convoy in Rafah. On June 17, 2024, an Israeli airstrike targeted security personnel and civilians in Rafah, Gaza, people who were securing the arrival of aid trucks. The attack resulted in the deaths of at least 9 people and injured several others. The incident occurred during a period of heightened tensions and ongoing conflict in the region, from the occupying nation and continuing to wipe out civilians, with Israel claiming to have tightened control over parts of Rafah as part of its military operations. The attack has drawn international attention and condemnation, with various sources reporting on the casualties and the broader implications for humanitarian aid and the conflict in Gaza. So there you can see some of the bodies, unfortunately, in the bags. This Public Image would say they had the song called Black Rubber Bags. It's actually not called Black Rubber Bags. It's called, I think, PPP or something like that. It's on the album. And there's more. 8 Palestinians were killed. Here we go. Here's some footage right here. Just give this to you. If you're listening on freeworld.fm, we got people being rushed into a hospital, and yes, maybe I'll stop showing that. Oh, it's ending now anyway. But yeah, it seems a little bit voyeuristic watching people check inside body bags for loved ones, doesn't it? But that's what our money gets to pay for. Fantastic, isn't it? So let's get some more information here from antiwar.com, as they are doing great work. Even though Dave DeCamp is on a 2-week vacation, here's that first piece about Netanyahu demanding more. Netanyahu demands White House give him tools to finish the job in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, this is by Kyle Anzalone, working both for Interwar.com and Libertarian Institute. Benjamin Netanyahu published a scathing video blasting the White House for holding back weapons shipments to Israel. Washington has blocked one transfer of, as you know, 2,000-pound bombs, but has overwhelmingly provided all the arms requested by Tel Aviv. The PM demanded the U.S. supply the tools Israel needs to finish the job a lot faster in the Gaza Strip. So that makes us ask what exactly he thinks the job is. Well, he showed us what he thinks the job is. He has already mentioned Nakba, and people in his party have already said they need to sweep people away. His party already used the phrase from the river to the sea before the Palestinians used it in an ironic way to flip it back on the Israelis. You might have seen him picking up photographs and showing how Israel would basically occupy the entire zone that it has been slowly heading in to occupy more and more of since 1947. Benjamin Netanyahu's getting the job done has nothing to do with stopping so-called terrorists or rescuing hostages. Because if he wanted to rescue hostages and get them back, he had an agreement that supposedly Israel came up with, but then Israel denied. So maybe Israel didn't come up with that proposal in the first place, even though Joe Biden claimed that it had. Hamas had agreed to many of the portions of that and at least acknowledged that. As you saw John Mearsheimer mention, Professor Mearsheimer was speaking with Katie Halper last week, and he said, yeah, at least Hamas, the leadership of which got money from Israel and the United States to remain defiant so that they wouldn't negotiate for years, so that, of course, Netanyahu could engage in more kinetic activity and blame Hamas as being somehow antagonistic and oppositional. That actually changed. Hamas said, okay, we accept most of the provisions of this, and they acknowledged receipt of that proposal last week, as Mearsheimer mentioned. What party didn't? The very party that Biden told us came up with the concept, the Netanyahu government. So getting the job done seems to me a lot more like genocide, and I think that that's probably likely. Now, if I'm off base, you let me know. Put it inside the chat and things. That's our way to communicate right now. And maybe tomorrow night or Thursday night, I'll open things up. We'll do that open lines thing. And so you can hop in with camera or just on microphone, and it'll be just like a radio talk show. So that'll be super cool. Wherever you are, that's great. So let's watch this again as Netanyahu tells us all these things, but we'll do it in just a minute as we get a little more context from Kyle. Netanyahu published this scathing video blasting the White House for holding back the weapons, the block of the one transfer of the 2,000-pound bombs. On Tuesday, he posted the video to his X account, speaking in English. The PM said, when Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, because, of course, where else should the United States taxpayers be sending him but to Israel, where the guy has dual citizenship? We had a candid, yes, I know he's going to have to go back for his encore to Rockin' in the Free World and then eat in another maybe Nazi-themed Ukrainian restaurant, because evidently that's all that they have for pizza places in Ukraine is Nazi-themed pizza places with their ovens. But when Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciate the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. How about even before that? For years, $3.8 billion every year as part of the NDAA. Well, not really, as part of the omnibus budget. How about that, Benny? Benny, is that okay? Maybe the word appreciation shouldn't apply when it's ill-gotten goods. They're stolen. And don't ever think that when a political structure sends you some weapons or money or something like that to keep you in office, because if you weren't in office, you would be arrested. And if you try to leave Israel, a lot of countries will arrest you as well for war crimes. Interestingly enough, don't ever think that somehow it means the American people in some giant gelatinous way love you. We're doing it because tax goon guns are pointing at us. That's why, Benny. That's why. That's why you're the 51st state or maybe the 52nd state after Ukraine. So, in late April, the White House decided it would suspend that shipment of the 2,000-pound bombs. According to Netanyahu, the White House will likely reverse course on its vow to scale back this military aid. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these blocks. Really, that's interesting. So would that be that they're going to amend the Constitution to remove those blocks because they claim the Constitution has authority over you and me, even though it doesn't? In fact, the Constitution didn't even have authority over the people around the American states, the 13 original states at the time. You can't even claim that the people who signed the document explicitly got people's consent to sign the document. It's impossible. The whole thing is a conjurer's trick. But at least a guy like Blinken, who tells us he's going to be an agent of the United States under the Constitution, at least he could have the chutzpah. At least he could have the inner strength to say, okay, you got me. I'll operate by the Constitution today. No, it's not going to happen. So let's watch that blowhard again as he talks to you and me on X.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's close.
The guy, America has been it's like Lucy. It's just like Lucy. You remember I talked about Lucy Van Pelt from Peanuts the other night, and I mentioned how Jeanne Shaheen, this really unctuous Democrat who's a U.S. senator, former governor, and she's one of the few people I can't get along with. And, you know, I'm pretty pleasant to everybody. Somebody asked her, who's your favorite Peanuts character? And she didn't seem to have the self-awareness to recognize that by saying Lucy Van Pelt, people would, yes, associate her attack dog nastiness to Lucy Van Pelt, who's always pulling the football away from Charlie Brown. And Merry Christmas, Charlie Brown says she was just expecting what was coming to her, right? Or no, that wasn't Lucy. That was Charlie Brown's sister, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. So I'll take that back. So Benjamin Netanyahu's like Charlie Brown's sister there. He's just expecting what's coming to him, right? He's just expecting his due share of your earnings.
Closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, give us the tools, we'll do the job. And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
No, man, what a guy, huh? He's almost pulling a book out of Nikki Haley, a page out of Nikki Haley's book. That's great. I wonder if Nikki Haley wrote that for him, because obviously they must be super close. They're both massive warmongers and love death. Maybe she signed that for him. You know, maybe she signed it. That might have been it. Now, something I want to mention to you, if you go to my X feed, you'll see this one. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but the Associated Press actually did a good job on this one. It's talking about how the attacks by the Israelis in Gaza are wiping out entire families, just ending them. No history left, nothing. Just entire families. Of course, because, I mean, you know, they're pulverizing the place. What is it, 40,000 dead now? With another however many 30,000 unheard of. Nobody knows where they are. Okay, now back to antiwar.com with one other big punch here, a big one. So let's get over to this one. Of course, this I want to mention doubly. This one they've linked over to Middle East Eyes. So you saw this, as I mentioned it from X. War in Gaza, Israeli forces destroy Rafah Crossing's departure hall. Destruction of only exit point for Palestinians with Egypt could mean crossing won't be operational soon. So not only are they insistent that Egypt take those people, not only have they broken the Camp David Accords by taking over a particular area in Rafah, they have also now destroyed the crossing. Not the craw, as they would say in Get Smart. Here it is by the MEE staff. Israeli forces have torched and destroyed facilities at the Rafah crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, including halls used for arrival and departure, according to local officials and media reports. Quote, occupation forces damaged Rafah crossings halls that were used by locals to exit the Strip, the Gaza-based government media office said in a statement on Monday. Pictures shared online, which were not verified by Middle East Eye, showed that what appears to be the exterior of the crossing's departure hall incinerated. It's just throwing it in your face. They just do not care about the opinions of people with any morals in any way at all. They don't care. Wow. Just incredible. All right, my friends, let's check out the chat. Say hi to you guys. And in this war segment, I want to mention Michelle Obama. I would body slam Netanyahu and name the move Pharaoh's staff snapper. See you jumping off the top, right? That would be awesome. I'll mention that to Glenn Jacobs next time I see him, if he's ever going to be going back in the ring. Incinerated. Yep, incinerated. Inside Rumble chat, want to congratulate Risha again for hanging out with the news on the calf. That's really cool. And don't forget, everybody, please hit the thumbs up and spread the word on this. We're starting with some very intense news, and it's going to get even wilder because, of course, as we know from the Russia-Ukraine battle, NATO, of course, has pushed all the way into the Iron Curtain regions, and the United States overthrew Ukraine. The United States has been doing all sorts of nefarious things in there since 2005, on and off. Then from 2014 on, with the Yatsenyuk government that they cobbled together, and then with Zelensky, even more corruption, killing of even more ethnic Russians with the Azov Battalion, association with Nazis very clearly, and the United States basically using Ukraine as a money laundering outfit and a way to give even more riches to the weapons manufacturers as they threaten people inside the Russian borders, now giving them long-range missiles, as the British have done, and the French are promising their troops to go in, and NATO now is talking nuclear deployment around the Russian border, thanks to Poland, and a lot of other nonsense, as the G7 got together and thought that they could be really bullish out there. Before I even go into Ukraine, let me show you some more. The last bit I want to show you on the Israeli conflict right now, the Israeli genocide. This from RT, and it'll bring us over to Russia right here.
China back then as well, and now this delegation is back, and this time of course in India, where they will be meeting the Dalai Lama. This is tomorrow, of course. This is a developing story.
Oh yeah, and this is just the tail end of one of the reports as I was recording it. Nancy Pelosi's meeting with the Dalai Lama. And the Chinese see the Dalai Lama as an extremist, anti-Chinese government force. So just like our trip to Taiwan, it's there's no need to be doing that. It's just ridiculous. And the United States is not going to have any positive effect on anything in an outcome on that, except to generate more antagonism and more frustration with the Chinese authorities. Thank you for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
On Free Talk Live, we're bringing people to the ideas of liberty every day. From wrestling superstars like Glenn Jacobs.
You guys really are having an impact, I believe. Like I said, a lot of where I am now is due to listening to Free Talk Live. You changed my mind on some very important issues years ago.
To random people tuning in on the radio.
I was kind of stuck in the left-right paradigm. I heard your show by chance on a Saturday night. From there, I went on, joined the Free State Project, and become an amplifier. So, I mean, that's really the reason why I amp, is because I know that if it wasn't for you guys being on as many stations as you are, I never would have found the ideas of liberty.
You can help more people hear the message of liberty by joining Free Talk Live's AMPS program on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. And you'll get access to special perks. Visit amps.freetalklive.com, amps.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Boeing could be criminally charged, as has been recommended by US prosecutors investigating 2 fatal crashes of their MAX planes 6 years ago. The US Department of Justice has until July the 7th to decide whether to charge or extend a deal that avoids prosecution. Everson's Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
346 people died in 2 Boeing MAX 7 crashes on Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines in 2018 and 2019. That fleet was grounded for 2 years, and it was then found a new design had dipped the nose of those planes automatically to compensate for shifting the larger engines forward. Boeing made a deal with the Department of Justice in 2021 in which it agreed to pay out $2.5 billion worth of penalties and compensations to the customers and families of those who died. Well, the DOJ now has a couple of weeks to decide whether to file criminal charges against that major US plane manufacturer. Caroline Malone, Washington.
Monday marks 2 years since the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right to abortions. It's become a key political issue for voters, with access to terminations expected to play a key role in November's presidential election. Everson's Sally Patterson reports from New York.
For nearly 5 decades, Americans were guaranteed constitutional protections for abortions. A landmark ruling by the Supreme Court in 1973 cemented women's right to choose in a case known as Roe v. Wade. But exactly 2 years ago, that ruling was overturned, opening the floodgates to one of America's most divisive debates. Since that decision, nearly a third of states have implemented near-total bans on the procedure, while access to abortion is severely restricted in several others. On Monday, President Joe Biden's election campaign slammed his rival Donald Trump, accusing him of being the, quote, sole person responsible for this nightmare.
Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is in Washington, D.C. for what he's described as critical talks on the fighting in Gaza and the escalating tensions on the border with Lebanon. As Everson's Benji Hire reports.
At the fore of these discussions, twin intertwined conflicts with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, both Iran-backed militias launching attacks on Israel. Hezbollah began cross-border strikes into northern Israel in support of Hamas and pledges not to stop until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hinted at a possible temporary truce in the Palestinian territory 8 months into his army's devastating offensive into the enclave. He wants to see the release of Israeli hostages still held in the Strip before then resuming military activities. That falls short of a US-endorsed proposal for a deal that would usher in a permanent ceasefire. Benji Hire, Washington.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
Yep, we still do email. Drop your email address in the entry box at freetalklive.com, and you'll be kept in the loop with Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live. Thanks for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Remember, join us every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on Rockfin, Rumble, my X/Twitter at Gard Goldsmith, and now on YouTube. And you can also head over to my Substack, the Gardner Goldsmith Substack, and you'll find the Sunday News Assembly there every Sunday with lots of big stories about individual liberty. Thanks, everyone.
To the Middle East, where IDF strikes on Gaza took the lives of at least 17 Palestinians overnight, according to local health officials. Casualties were reported in the southern city of Rafah and the Nusayrat camp in the enclave center. A warning, disturbing images ahead. The aftermath from a series of raids on the latter reportedly left 2 homes destroyed by IDF warplanes. Among the victims are displaced families, children, and the elderly who had recently relocated from Rafah. It's believed more people remain trapped under the rubble, and officials expect the number of casualties to increase. Gazan authorities say the death toll in the Strip since October 7th now sits at 37,300 Palestinians. The U.S. Secretary of State says Washington remains committed to arming Israel. However, Anthony Blinken confirmed that the delivery of one specific batch of American bombs suspended by the Pentagon last month is still up in the air.
We, as you know, are continuing to review one shipment that President Biden has talked about with regard to 2,000-pound bombs because of our concerns about their use in a densely populated area like Rafah. That remains under review. But everything else is moving as it normally would move. And again, with the perspective of making sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself against this multiplicity of challenges.
Well, we just heard that Washington is ready to stay supportive and committed and provide Israel with even more weapons to continue the war in Gaza, to deter Hezbollah and other threats Israel is currently facing. These people here just want this whole nightmare Israel has been living in the last 8 months to end. They blame Netanyahu for that. This is the third day in a row that Israelis are protesting across the country, demanding Prime Minister Netanyahu to step down and calling for elections. We hear from time to time the crowd chanting, Bchirot Achshav, it means elections now in Hebrew. We are in front of the Knesset, Israeli parliament now. Thousands, as you can see, have gathered here, but earlier in other places also, protests erupted. Demonstrators have been engaging with police, burning tires and wood, blocking the roads. Several people have already been arrested. Public is divided. People are losing patience. There is a split even within the Israeli leadership. On Monday, as you know, the country's war cabinet was dismantled after 2 of its 6 members, including Gantz, key opposition figure who decided to support the ruling coalition after Israel faced October 7th tragedy, left the emergency cabinet, while Gantz, as well as people here, blame Netanyahu. Prime Minister hints that the lack of tools and support from America that prevents Israel from getting the job done. Here's Netanyahu just earlier asking for even more assistance from its key ally, Washington.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, give us the tools, we'll do the job. And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
Well, it's important to remember that massive anti-government protests have been shaking Israel even before the Gaza war, but this recent conflict between Israel and Hamas and the way Israeli leadership has been dealing with it, people here.
I think that's within the recording system. But yeah, unbelievable what Netanyahu is demanding. That puts a pretty good punctuation mark on it. And of course, so many people who have relatives who are being held by Hamas want Netanyahu to stop this insanity and negotiate. But he's not going to do it because his long-term plans have a lot more to do with taking over that entire region, and they always have. So now let's turn to the Russia-Ukraine situation and the United States G7 cats who seem to think that they are still the belle of the ball. Well, no, I don't think so. In fact, let's get to more information about Vladimir Putin visiting North Korea. And this is the first time he's done that since 2000 when he was first elected as president in Russia.
NATO should self-reflect rather than arbitrarily smear and attack China. That was the response of the country's Foreign Affairs Ministry after the alliance's Secretary General took aim at Beijing for its growing alignment with Moscow.
The international community has its own opinion on the role played by NATO as a product of the Cold War and the world's largest military bloc in the Ukraine crisis. What NATO should do is self-reflect, then arbitrarily smear and attack China.
Lin Jian also urged NATO to stop shifting blame over the Ukraine crisis. His rebuke came after the bloc's chief claimed China has been providing vital technology to Russia that could aid Moscow in developing military equipment used in the ongoing Ukrainian conflict.
So let's just pause it right there. Think about Jens Stoltenberg, right? Stoltenberg, the man who now heads up NATO, he's just a politician. And that's all NATO is now. It's just a massive, corrupt political organization connected with the Atlantic Council. Has been like that for decades. By the way, I want to thank Steve Swan, Inside X. He says, Netanyahu already has nuclear bombs. What else does he need from us? Darn right, man. And it's amazing. They get all ticked off because they claim, they're telling us, I shouldn't even say they get all ticked off. They tell us this canard that we got to worry about Israel, about Iran's nuclear development, when Iran has been open to the nuclear inspections every time, always shows that it's only working on its nuclear materials to the point of using it for nuclear energy. They're not refining it deep enough to make it nuclear weapons. And yet Israel, they speak up about Iran as if Iran is the big bully on the block that's going to destroy the entire Middle East with nuclear missiles. And Israel will not be open to inspections, even though everybody knows they've got nuclear weapons that they acquired from the United States. Talk about massive hypocrisy. That one thing is so indicative of all of the patterns of the Israelis, this incredible double standard, the gaslighting, they're the bad guys while they're punching you in the face, while they're destroying lives in Palestine, taking over land. Oh, we're the oppressed. Really? I didn't know that. I didn't know you're the oppressed because I'm paying for you. How does that work? It doesn't stinking work, does it? Good job, Steve. Thank you. He says it's not the country of Israel, it's the state of Israel. Well stated. Netanyahu is a money-grubbing, he's a money-grubbing Zionist, we'll say, just like Zelensky. If at any point Putin feels that Russia is doomed, he will take the rest of us with them, he says. And Steve also says Blinken, Netanyahu, Zelensky, Schumer. Yeah, all those people. And, it's just incredible. You look at what Schumer did after the bump stock ruling from the SCOTUS, right? Introduces legislation. Just like I said, the Supreme Court rules, well, it was done through executive order, and that's not the right process to attack your rights. What is the right process to attack my rights? Well, the legislature should write it. I thought there was that Second Amendment. Well, quiet. Yeah, and of course that gets us to the lesson of what if they repeal the Second Amendment? Does that make it any more acceptable that they can point government guns at you and stop you from peacefully acquiring an accoutrement that attaches to a gun for self-defense? Is the ownership of a firearm an aggressive act? No, right? Does ownership connote intent? No. And even if it did, in the United States, more people, armed people, stop crimes every year than police do. So, in fact, you would want to have more armed people. As John Lott has noted, more guns, less crime in geographical areas. Criminals change behavior. I know, it's wacky, right? So stupid, which is part of the reason why the Israelis acquired nuclear weapons, supposedly as a deterrent. It's just, they keep trying to twist the logic and reality so that it can fit whatever future narrative they have as they continue to try to do what they want and acquire more power over people, over my neighbor. It's just unbelievable. These people are utter criminals. They're knife-wielding, gun-wielding maniacs is what they are. I wouldn't walk down a street if I knew these people were on that street at night. Not a chance, unless I was very well armed. So you got Stoltenberg, and this dude is saying it's the Chinese who are the problem. The Chinese are helping Russia. Well, what has NATO been doing with Ukraine? The country, the very playpen country that the West created in 2013, 2014 by overthrowing the Ukrainian election of late 2013 when Yanukovych was reelected after he was pushed out once around 2005 with the Orange Revolution, right? They will not stop. They've got no shame. They wear such masks, such devilish masks, they can never get them off. It's like that Twilight Zone episode with the Last Will and Testament where everybody had to put the masks on. Ah, man. Well, let's continue. Here we go.
According to Mr. Stoltenberg, Beijing could face consequences unless it changes course.
It cannot continue the way it is like it is today, where China really tries to have a normal relationship with the European NATO allies, and at the same time are enabling Russia to conduct a war of aggression against a European country. This is then about how, also, unless China changes its behavior, what kind of consequences should then this have for instance, our trade relations? Too early to say, but it has to be an issue that we need to address, because to continue as we do today is not viable.
Well, RT contributor Carl Jean spoke to the program earlier. He believes NATO tries to impose its will out of frustration because Moscow and Beijing dare to and are able to stand up to the bloc.
China and Russia are one of the few truly sovereign states in the world right now. Russia and China can say no to the United States. This is what NATO alliance do not like. They do not believe in sovereignty of nation states, and they like to impose their will. And this is what they mean when they say they will impose a cost. They act like the whole world is their sandbox. Yet it's a hegemonic virus that's on the brain of all the NATO bureaucrats that's making them the enemy of most of the country in the global south at this point.
Well stated. Absolutely right. The guy is nailing it. And I got to say, when I subscribed on Rumble to, followed RT on Rumble, I knew that, they had some great shows and stuff like that. And you probably have seen, I've been utilizing a lot of reports from RT. And I'm really glad that they're out there doing their thing. It's just incredible to see what has been going on with the United States, and the lies are so obvious. And yet so many politicians continue to walk that path. It's incredible. It's like the louder they speak, the more affirmation it gives them. I don't get it. I just don't understand. It's nuts. It's like watching those women out in the woods banging sticks on the ground or something like that. It's not going to change the passage of time, and it's not going to make your life better. Why don't you just, bucket up there, politicians, and recognize that a life of lies is going to lead to an eternity of burning. That's what you're going to get. And I want to thank big thing inside Rockfin. Michelle Obama is, trapped right now in, as he puts it, thanks to his contribution of $5 at Rockfin. He says, Democratic People's Republic of West Michigan. Yes. The DPRWM. Yeah, I'm sorry, man. And West Michigan, that's a nice area. I drove through there a number of times, actually. And isn't it weird when you're living in a beautiful area, but the people who manage it are just utter criminals? It's absolutely whacked out. It's so messed up. So, my friends, I give you this greeting because, of course, we are the propagandists. And yes, this segment of Liberty Conspiracy has been brought to you by our new advertisers, the Russian government.
From Russia with love, I fly to you, much wiser since my goodbye to you. I've traveled the world.
Yeah, what a great tune, Matt Monroe. We got to go back to this last bit of the chorus here.
Return from Russia with love.
And I do like the lyrics of this are great. I've seen Places, Faces, and Smiled for a Moment. It's got that little bit of melancholy to it, It's a great song from Russia with Love. And what a great movie. What a phenomenal movie from Russia with Love. And by the way, if you're not familiar, in the original novel From Russia with Love by Ian Fleming, and spoilers if you haven't seen the movie, but a character, Bond, has pretty much done the adventure. He's on a train. He's headed out of Russia. And this crazy Soviet woman who's an assassin appears. that he thought was gone, and she's got this poison tip on her boot that she's like going after him with. Now, people might say, why not just, have a knife or a silencer, a gun or something like that, but she's got this poison tip on her boot. In the book, he gets sliced by the poison tip. And I believe the line is he's Ian Fleming basically is Bond is going to die. That's the way he leaves the end of the book. That's the way From Russia with Love ends. I think the line is something like the friendly floor rose up to greet him, or something like that, or the floor rose to greet him, as he crashes down, which is a cool take on, the floor rising up. That's the way he's perceiving it, like that. But he brought him back. But that's the way the book ends. In the movie, of course, Sean Connery makes mincemeat out of the woman. But in the book, Bond gets hit by the poison tip of that woman's boot. This message brought to you, of course, by Tom McCann and Nike. If you want poison shoes, just approach Nike anytime. So From Russia with Love. Good stuff, everybody. Good stuff from Matt Monroe. What a voice he had, too. What an awesome voice. So with that stated, I want to head back over into the chats. Remind you, everybody, to spread the word about the show and thank everybody for being so awesome. Really appreciate that. And I want to remind you of a guest who was on David Knight's show today as we sort of depart the Russia thing. He is a man who has written a book called Wall Street, the Nazis, and the Crimes of the Deep State. And his name is David Hughes. And you can find his Substack over here. It's David A. Hughes. Just look it up, David A. Hughes Substack. I subscribed today, and that's one of his latest ones. This is just out on June 4th, the day the book was released, out today, Wall Street, the Nazis, and the Crimes of the Deep State. And the book concentrates on the Nazis, on the fascists, and the big corporate ties, the capitalist ties, you might say, that disregard nation state status or anything like that, and look at the special interests that they can conjure up and make money on during war times and things like that without any care about innocent people. And I think we're seeing a lot of that with a lot of the weapons manufacturers and the people who are on their boards and the politicians in Washington and elsewhere around the world and in places like NATO. But it was very interesting. This is published by Skyhorse Publishing. I think that's also Don Jeffries' major publisher. It's called Wall Street, the Nazis, and the Crimes of the Deep State. You'll be able to see, I'm not going to show the interview tonight, but if you go to my X feed or David's X feed, it's at Libertarian, you'll see the packaged 15, 20-minute conversation with this fascinating author, David Hughes. He's a British man. And I believe he teaches at the University of Lincolnshire. So what's very interesting is and I was in the chat, Occult Priestess was in there. A lot of you folks were there as well. I was able to pop in while I was taking care of the cats and the lynx in Russia. But there was a point at which, and to be fair, in conversation, this is an area that I would want to explore. I want to explore with David Hughes. So this isn't exactly fair to be, analyzing a conversation between two other people, that sort of thing. But with that caveat stated, I do want to mention that he and David got into a conversation about fascism, Marxism, and he brought up something that I have heard from some people, and I've often tried to give a little bit here on the folks who support Karl Marx to a certain extent. And it is that Karl Marx had a point coming out of the medieval feudal royal peerage system going into the industrial age. He had a point about the favoritism, otherwise known as mercantilism, that was going on with the state connecting to special interests that were rising up out of the remains of the old royal peerage system, who were getting favors from Parliament. Okay. Now, as I've mentioned before, these literally were called special acts of Parliament. And in some cases, they granted entire cities to people. Like if you go to Bath, that city was basically granted and constructed by a couple people. That's why a lot of the architecture is very similar in a lot of those areas, like the Circus and things like that, and the Crescent and things like that. They have that sort of Christopher Wren appearance to them. So these special acts of parliament, you could see how many of the common people who had already been suffering because of the royal peerage system and the enclosure movement that happened when the Roundheads came in and lasted for quite a while, over a couple hundred years, slowly but surely the royal peers would get the land that had been held by the common people with the little common lanes, and people had farming and things like that. They started to change things when the royal peers took over. They started to change things. They put up stone walls. They started to take away the agriculture and put in sheep. So wool became a very massive industry that actually helped lead to the rise of the British East India Company. And that's actually where the concept of pound sterling comes from. Murray Rothbard talks a little bit about that in his book Conceived in Liberty Volume 1. A lot of it coming out of Leeds and that area, a lot of shipping, and then they would go across over into Europe through land routes and stuff like that. So very interesting stuff. But Marx had a point about that sort of dislike for these already disreputable people who were involved with these special privileges that they would get because they were connected to the royals. So as the royal peerage system declined, you could see how Marx was successful in criticizing what he called capitalism, but is more appropriately understood as mercantilism, based on Adam Smith's 1776 treatise called The Wealth of Nations, right? Mercantilism, much like what we see today, it's crony capitalism. It's business people getting favors from the parliament and then returning the favor with special donations and that sort of thing. So you can see if they could get a lock on this business government nexus, and you got to have the government to be able to do this, then you perpetuate this system. Thanks for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Free Talk Live is brought to you by Dash Digital Cash. With fees of less than a penny per transaction, Dash is made for spending. Dash is one of the oldest cryptocurrencies and is widely available on exchanges, including the decentralized Maya protocol and in multi-crypto wallets. Thanks to the Dash DAO for sending us 32 Dash per month. For this sponsorship. It's easy to get and use Dash. You can learn more at dash.org. That's dash.org.
Join liberty-minded voluntarists, anarchists, and libertarians from June 13th through the 16th for the 8th annual Fork Fest at Rogers Campground in the beautiful White Mountains of New Hampshire. Fork Fest is a fork of the Porcupine Freedom Festival, which has sold out in recent years. Fork Fest happens the weekend before the Porcupine Freedom Festival. Fork Fest is decentralized, which means that there's no ticket cost and no one is in charge. All you have to do to join the fun is reserve your camping site, RV site, or motel room with Rogers Campground for June 13th through the 16th. You can find out more at the unofficial website, forkfest.party. You can also connect with other attendees on the ForkFest Telegram and Matrix chat rooms, as well as the ForkFest Forum. You can find links to those at forkfest.party. We hope to see you there June 13th through the 16th. forkfest.party.
My name is Jacob Hornberger. I'm president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, which Congressman Ron Paul awarded for having an outstanding freedom website. Write us at fff@fff.org, and we'll send you a free 3-month subscription to our monthly journal of libertarian essays and our booklet, Economic Liberty in the Constitution, which George Mason University economics professor Walter Williams praised in a recent column. That's fff@fff.org.
What if you want to hear the latest episode of Free Talk Live, but all you have is your phone, you forgot to download our archive, and you have no data connection? You can call our Listen line at 641-793-0191. That's a long-distance number, so you may incur charges. If not, listen as long as you want. 641-793-0191. The Free Talk Live listen line, 641-793-0191.
The latest episode of Free Talk Live continues with Hour 2 up next after the news here at listen.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Boeing could be criminally charged, as has been recommended by US prosecutors investigating 2 fatal crashes of their MAX planes 6 years ago. The US Department of Justice has until July the 7th to decide whether to charge or extend a deal that avoids prosecution. FSN's Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
346 people died in 2 Boeing MAX 7 crashes on Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines in 2018 and 2019. That fleet was grounded for 2 years, and it was then found a new design had dipped the nose of those planes automatically to compensate for shifting the larger engines forward. Boeing made a deal with the Department of Justice in 2021 in which it agreed to pay out $2.5 billion worth of penalties and compensations to the customers and families of those who died. Well, the DOJ now has a couple of weeks to decide whether to file criminal charges against that major US plane manufacturer. Caroline Malone, Washington.
Monday marks 2 years since the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right to abortions. It's become a key political issue for voters, with access to terminations expected to play a key role in November's presidential election. FSN's Sally Patterson reports from New York.
For nearly 5 decades, Americans were guaranteed constitutional protections for abortions. A landmark ruling by the Supreme Court in 1973 cemented women's right to choose in a case known as Roe v. Wade. But exactly 2 years ago, that ruling was overturned, opening the floodgates to one of America's most divisive debates. Since that decision, nearly a third of states have implemented near-total bans on the procedure, while access to abortion is severely restricted in several others. On Monday, President Joe Biden's election campaign slammed his rival Donald Trump, accusing him of being the, quote, sole person responsible for this nightmare.
Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is in Washington, D.C. for what he's described as critical talks on the fighting in Gaza and the escalating tensions on the border with Lebanon. As FSN's Benji Hire reports.
At the fore of these discussions, twin intertwined conflicts with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, both Iran-backed militias launching attacks on Israel. Hezbollah began cross-border strikes into northern Israel in support of Hamas and pledges not to stop until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hinted at a possible temporary truce in the Palestinian territory 8 months into his army's devastating offensive into the enclave. He wants to see the release of Israeli hostages still held in the Strip before then resuming military activities. That falls short of a US-endorsed proposal for a deal that would usher in a permanent ceasefire. Benji Hire, Washington.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks. Today, the upcoming treason trial in Russia of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. It is due to begin on Wednesday in the city of Yekaterinburg, where the journalist was arrested nearly 15 months ago. Miriam Elder is with America's Council on Foreign Relations.
The state is accusing Evan of espionage, a charge that he, the Wall Street Journal, and the U.S. government vehemently deny. And most cases involving national security are held in secret, so no journalists will be allowed in the courtroom. And the State Department said this week that they'll try to have embassy officials inside, but they're not sure if that'll be allowed. More than 99% of Russian court cases end in conviction. The judge on this trial once told an interviewer that he's only ever acquitted 3 or 4 people in his 20-plus year career. So since for most trials in Russia, you can fairly confidently expect a guilty verdict, a lot of attention is put on sentencing. Evan faces up to 20 years in prison. There is counterintuitively a window of optimism here, though. In those cases where Russia engages in prisoner swaps or releases people early, it tends to do so after a verdict has been handed down. So that Evan's case is moving ahead could give some hope that some sort of a swap might be possible.
Since his arrest, Evan Gershkovich has been held in Lefortovo prison, a Tsarist-era jail in Moscow, known for its Spartan conditions and the isolation in which inmates are held. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
And the main news again, Boeing could be criminally charged. It's been recommended by US prosecutors. The Department of Justice is now deciding whether to take matters forward. This Monday marks 2 years since the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right to abortions, and Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is in Washington, D.C. for what he's described as critical talks on the fighting in Gaza. That's Feature Story News. Nick Harper reporting.
Republicans back a plan for universal lawn care, and an RC car works up the courage to approach a group of girls. And now a recap of the week's news for those who like to waste their summers surfing the internet. Fall, the long-running series of shorter days and cooler nights, was canceled this week after nearly 3 billion seasons on Earth. The classic period of the year, which once occupied the coveted slot between summer and winter, will be replaced by new stifling humidity levels and near-constant sunshine. A shiny, bobbing object in the water is generating fascination among members of the fish community, who have described it as pleasingly wiggly and minnow-esque. Aquatic experts say that decisive action must be taken against the object very soon. In local news, just when 27-year-old Andrew Sheets didn't think his vacation could get any better, a rerun of Spin City came on. And in other headlines, a bee stuck between the screen and front door is going nuts. And a water skier lets go of the crossbar to greet those not currently water skiing.
This is the Onion News Network.
Got Telegram? You can follow our channel there and discuss show prep with other listeners at telegram.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
Thanks so much for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Remember, you can check out Liberty Conspiracy live every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Rumble, Rockfin, YouTube, and my Twitter/X @GardGoldsmith. And please feel free to visit my Substack. That is the Gardner Goldsmith Substack, where, of course, you can get the Sunday News Assembly with over 20 stories every week that pertain to liberty, plus contextual information to help break apart those stories and take away valuable lessons for freedom. There was a point at which, and to be fair, in conversation, this is an area that I would want to explore. I want to explore with David Hughes. So this isn't exactly fair to be, analyzing a conversation between two other people, that sort of thing. But with that caveat stated, I do want to mention that he and David got into a conversation about fascism, Marxism, and he brought up something that I have heard from some people, and I've often tried to give a little bit here on the folks who support Karl Marx to a certain extent, and it is that Karl Marx had a point coming out of the medieval feudal royal peerage system going into the industrial age. He had a point about the favoritism, otherwise known as mercantilism, that was going on with the state connecting to special interests that were rising up out of the remains of the old royal peerage system, who were getting favors from Parliament. Okay? Now, as I've mentioned before, these literally were called special acts of Parliament. And in some cases, they granted entire cities to people. Like if you go to Bath, that city was basically granted and constructed by a couple people. That's why a lot of the architecture is very similar in a lot of those areas, like the Circus and things like that, and the Crescent and things like that. They have that sort of Christopher Wren appearance to them. So these special acts of Parliament, you could see how many of the common people who had already been suffering because of the royal peerage system and the enclosure movement that happened when the Roundheads came in and lasted for quite a while, over a couple hundred years, slowly but surely the royal peers would get the land that had been held by the common people with the little common lanes, and people had farming and things like that. They started to change things when the royal peers took over. They started to change things. They put up stone walls. They started to take away the agriculture and put in sheep. So wool became a very massive industry that actually helped lead to the rise of the British East India Company. And that's actually where the concept of pound sterling comes from. Murray Rothbard talks a little bit about that in his book, Conceived in Liberty, Volume 1. A lot of it coming out of Leeds and that area, a lot of shipping. And then they would go across over into Europe through land routes and stuff like that. So very interesting stuff. But Marx had a point about that sort of dislike for these already disreputable people who were involved with these special privileges that they would get because they were connected to the royals. So as the royal peerage system declined, you could see how Marx was successful in criticizing what he called capitalism, but is more appropriately understood as mercantilism, based on Adam Smith's 1776 treatise called The Wealth of Nations, right? Mercantilism, much like what we see today, it's crony capitalism. It's business people getting favors from the parliament and then returning the favor with special donations and that sort of thing. So you can see, if they could get a lock on this business government nexus, and you got to have the government to be able to do this, then you perpetuate this system. So Marx was right there, and David Hughes was he had a lot of laudable things to say about Marx. And he even said to David that, you know, a lot of people don't understand Marx and his class struggle. The class struggle was right. To a certain extent, that is correct. But Marx went off after that, and he was a towering hypocrite, because maybe he thought he was doing the right thing. He got his money for writing the Communist Manifesto and for Das Kapital from Engels, who got it from his father, who ran a textile mill, a factory. And what was one of the big things that Marx hated? The factories. He hated the mills. He wanted private property removed. Okay. Now, if you go to England, you will know that a lot of the traditional British history has seen a slightly different take on private property than what we have in the United States. And in fact, there's a term called Georgist libertarian from this philosopher. And what they don't like the idea of private property itself being held by private hands, because they saw this corruption that happened as the Roundheads came in. The feudal system really propped up a number of people. The royal peerage system saw them get all these advantages, and then they started to see the industrial age, and of course the advantages that were given to those industrial magnates that were connected with Parliament, all right, and got those special Parliament acts. So Marx was right there, but Marx went even further. He wanted the abolition of private property, right? And David Hughes mentioned that he thought it was inappropriate to say that Marx's ideas lead to Stalinism. But of course they're going to lead to Stalinism. It's the only logical outcome, because if, as Marx said, private property should be abolished, you need some sort of central power that can prevent people from claiming private property. And what is the ultimate private property? Oneself and one's skills. It infests everything philosophically, from whether it's ground-based land property or it's money property that you get. Some government entity is going to be there under Marx's idea. His idea was that eventually the state would wither away. That's not possible under Marxism. That's not possible, because the state is there before anything else, as he says, it's going to wither away. He has to have the dictatorship of the proletariat to eliminate private property from getting into people's hands. And then what? And then he says the state will wither away and it'll just be voluntary actions. Based on what? Private property understanding. The only way to engage in voluntary interaction and private contract with people, amongst other people, maybe not even a contract recognized by the state, but by common people. The only way to do that, to engage in that, is to claim for oneself ownership of oneself and one's rights. And from that, psychologically, historically, religiously, the items on which you work have to be protected by you. You have to be able to have a claim on those things. And the dictatorship of the proletariat can never let up, because that claim over those things is private property. So you have a property in yourself, and you have a property in the things that you need and that you work on to acquire for yourself. And it's a reciprocal thing. It's a negative hands-off thing. You respect somebody else's ability to do that, and they respect yours. But Marx doesn't do that. Marx thinks there's a greater honor in some giant group saying, no, you can't have that. That's too much. No, you can't have that. You acquired that in illegitimate ways. So the end product is always some central authority tyranny. You can't get around that with Marxism. It's impossible. And if you go through the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, he has a central bank. Well, how are you going to have a central bank if you're going to have the state wither away, Carl? How does that work? Obviously, because he never thought the state actually would wither away. You would have an eternal dictatorship of whatever the proletariat wanted to say it was. Whatever ruling class was in charge, if they say that they represent the little guy, they're the ones in charge. And that's what we have in the United States. We have a combination of Rousseauian socialism and fascism and Karl Marx. That's what we've got. We've got ridiculous stupidity about everything's got to be for America, that it's we the people, which is similar to the hyper-nationalism of Italy and Nazi Germany. And then we've got the collectivism and welfarism of Rousseau and Karl Marx. And we've got Rousseau's idea of the general will, that anything that the government says, whether it's about masks or it's about mRNA or it's about Zionism, somehow you can't criticize them. They've got all the answers. They're untouchable. They are always right. And that's what Rousseau said. So we have all of these vestiges of utterly stupid and insane ideas that have promulgated and really rest upon envy. They rest upon the envy of somebody has more than I have. Somebody is not doing what I think ought to be done. And never thinking about how, if that is reciprocated, you're the target. So it was a fascinating conversation. Again, I want to show you, because I agreed with David Hughes in so many ways, and I really want to talk to him because he has, I think, a great deal of positive things to say about the early genesis of some of that Marxist theory that is valuable if you look at it within the context of British history and the way the Parliament and business people were working together. Not all business people, that's the problem, right? And again, if you go with the term the bourgeoisie, well, that's just a version of burgher, right? And the burgher was whom? The burgher was the man who had been appointed by the royalty to be the governor or mayor of a county or a state. That was the burgher in Germany. So again, you've got that nexus there between the state and the so-called bourgeoisie business owners, people, right? There's all sorts of stuff mixed in with that, including things like guilds and corporations, and when guilds started to be recognized more like corporations, and how much influence the guilds had on the governments in various places in Europe and things like that, versus how much did the guilds form to protect themselves from attacks by the government, that sort of thing. So all sorts of fascinating stuff that's in there. And so I'll recommend once more David Hughes. See, the website I'm at is called bookshop.org, and I got there from his publisher's website. So if you want to check that out, definitely do so. I think you'll find it pretty darn cool. As he says, you can get it on Kindle, and there's a hardcover edition, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to bring that up. I thought it would be pretty cool, and I'd love to get your comments, because I know Occult Priestess was talking about how she would be inside the chat. I don't know if she is there now, but those of you who got to see the conversation, I hope that I'm hitting it appropriately without, again, it's something where it's just my observations. So there are probably a lot of things that David Hughes could mention to me where I'd say, oh, okay, well, so go back and forth on it, sort of thing. So it's not exactly, fair to do it in this way, but I just wanted to bring those observations up. And I also want to mention, thank you everybody for hanging out in Rumble. I know Rumble had some, I don't know if they were under attack earlier or not, but, by the way, yes, Steve Swan mentions how Karl Marx was a Jewish guy. And if you get a chance to read about Karl Marx's life, he was just a despicable person. He was just, I think he was insane. He was a really weird guy. And Yeah, didn't bathe, demanded. Here's a guy who wanted to, under the Communist Manifesto, wanted to say that inheritance couldn't happen. And yet when his father died, he was insistent that his mother keep sending him more and more money from his father's inheritance, even though the will hadn't even been worked out yet. He basically alienated his sister because of that. They have letters from his mom like, what are you doing? You're splitting the family up here. Stop that. Just amazing stuff. So definitely wanted to bring that up. Now, want to go into another topic that I think you might find pretty darn interesting. And for that, we need another theme. It's time to get into a state of confusion in the United States for the trans gang.
I don't know whether I'm coming or I'm going. Can't cover up, 'cause it's obviously showing. It's a state of confusion. We're in the States.
Yeah, all right. I'm digging it. These guys are awesome. Is that Piccadilly Circus? I don't know. All right, Kinks. Thank you. Good stuff from the Kinks, everybody. And so let's get into the first part of this Title IX reporting that I mentioned to you. If you got a chance to see the MRC TV website, you saw that I gave this report, and I talked a little bit about this on Friday, but I was able to go much more in depth on this. And then I want to give you some added information from Natalie Morris. This is the last night in their old studio. They're going to be going to a new studio. I don't know whether they're going to be live tomorrow. I think they're going to be packaging pieces while they get the opportunities to put stuff out, because they won't have all the tech together. So that might not be live tomorrow and tomorrow on Thursday. But here's my piece for MRC TV. Wrote a story about it. I'd like to tell it to you now. Court's Title IX case ruling proves a deeper problem, and most are missing it. All right, so let's go to the video footage.
Offering emotional satisfaction but little intellectual, constitutional, or moral completeness, a federal district court judge Thursday issued an injunction against the Biden administration enforcing so-called Title IX equal opportunity in education mandates on states to include trans men posing as women or women posing as men. Let's see why celebration might not be appropriate here. Hi, everyone. I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC TV. And here's the story. Timothy Narazi reports for Fox News, quote, U.S. District Judge Terry Doughty granted a preliminary injunction on Thursday and referred to the Biden administration's unilateral Title IX changes as a threat to democracy, end quote, which hints at big lessons wrapped inside this news package. As Judge Doughty ought to know, the U.S. Constitution set up a representative republic, supposedly constraining the government by limiting those issues on which the representatives could vote in their majority pocket of pseudo-democracy within Congress. Democracy is gang rule, and there's no democracy to be applauded in the U.S. There is no threatened democracy in the U.S. because the system isn't a demos. It's a republic with strict limits that are legible within the Constitution. As a result, Judge Doughty more appropriately could have said that the Biden administration's unilateral Title IX changes are a threat to the U.S. Constitution via arbitrary executive branch expansion of Title IX of the Education Amendments that was enacted in 1972. Why does it take a non-judge talking about this issue? Why does it take someone outside the government to remind the tax-paid judge about this reality? Likewise, should it be up to me and perhaps you, the viewer, to mention to the judge or people involved with government that there are deeper problems here? Problems stemming from that 1972 statute itself? Well, we'll dig into those problems in a moment. Right now, let's see more of what, for some conservatives, is an issue to celebrate. To celebrate because they have understandably become upset about the rising tide of wokeism and trans ideology in public education. Narazi reports that Dottie's injunction is based on what we've come to expect from supposedly conservative judges, a finding of offense in the process of the Biden administration expanding Title IX parameters, not a problem with Title IX itself. Quote, this case demonstrates the abuse of power by executive federal agencies in the rulemaking process, Doughty said in his ruling. The separation of powers and system of checks and balances exist in this country for a reason. Doughty ruled that the changes were inadmissible because the term gender discrimination, as used in the establishment of Title IX, only included discrimination against biological males and females at the time of enactment, end quote. So Judge Doughty correctly cited biological truth, which might give hope to Americans concerned about the cultural Marxist postmodernist move to rewrite the laws of nature, manipulate the language, and broaden the laws of the U.S. to hand out special favors to new government-favored special interests. But will the supporters of Judge Doughty's decision think about the larger problem? The judge's cozy but ill-informed use of the pat mantra, checks and balances, indicates that he hasn't thought about the larger issue, that instead he equates an expansion of Title IX that might be done through Congress rather than the Biden administration to something acceptable, something in keeping with that wondrous checks and balances term that he probably picked up in grade school. The checks are in the Constitution, and only by seeing the area of the Constitution that's being manipulated by Title IX itself can one begin to safeguard against future manipulation of the language, degradation of federalism, and attacks on the Constitution. According to the tax-fueled U.S. government's own U.S. Courts website, the key lever for the 1972 Title IX boosters at the time to promote their original imposition on colleges, high schools, and other educational institutions was, of course, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, as I mentioned last week, the belief that equal handouts by government, handouts that are funded through extraction of wealth from others, the belief that handouts are the same thing as equal protection against person-on-person aggression shows us how far afield most Americans, especially politicians and judges, are from the original conception of government as being a protector rather than a provider of handouts. It is this contemporary reimagining of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, the actual text of the Equal Protection Clause, that they have reshaped, that is the linchpin of Title IX and of Biden's attempt to unilaterally expand it. So, as the U.S. government explains, quote, Congress enacted Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, which requires that no person be excluded from participation in, denied the benefits of, or subjected to discrimination on the basis of sex under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. It authorizes any federal agency that provides such assistance to issue regulations to enforce the prohibition of sex discrimination. It also allows termination of financial assistance when an institution does not voluntarily comply, end quote.
Thanks for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
We have some good news. The indictments against Ross Ulbricht in the District of Maryland were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can never be refiled. This is especially good because those indictments contain the only charge ever made that Ross engaged in murder for hire. This was a serious allegation that Ross Ulbricht denies. It was never prosecuted or ruled on by a jury, but was trumpeted by the federal government and the media as if it were proven fact. The Maryland court held these indictments for almost 5 years, poisoning Ross's case and leaving him under a cloud of unproven allegations. convictions. As explained in Ross's appeal to the Supreme Court, the fact that the judge used these allegations to give Ross a draconian sentence of double life without parole violated his Sixth Amendment right to a jury trial. Judges are required to issue sentences based on convictions decided by a jury, not unproven allegations never even charged at trial. Although this is a positive development, the dropped indictment will not set Ross free. Now, a presidential pardon is Ross's only hope of freedom. Sign the petition at freeross.org. freeross.org.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Boeing could be criminally charged, as has been recommended by US prosecutors investigating two fatal crashes of their MAX planes 6 years ago. The US Department of Justice has until July the 7th to decide whether to charge or extend a deal that avoids prosecution. FSN's Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
346 people died in two Boeing MAX 7 crashes on Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines in 2018 and 2019. That fleet was grounded for 2 years, and it was then found a new design had dipped the nose of those planes automatically to compensate for shifting the larger engines forward. Boeing made a deal with the Department of Justice in 2021 in which it agreed to pay out $2.5 billion worth of penalties and compensations to the customers and families of those who died. Well, the DOJ now has a couple of weeks to decide whether to file criminal charges against that major US plane manufacturer. Caroline Malone, Washington.
Monday marks 2 years since the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right to abortions. It's become a key political issue for voters, with access to terminations expected to play a key role in November's presidential election. FSN's Sally Patterson reports from New York.
For nearly 5 decades, Americans were guaranteed constitutional protections for abortions. A landmark ruling by the Supreme Court in 1973 cemented women's right to choose in a case known as Roe v. Wade. But exactly 2 years ago, that ruling was overturned, opening the floodgates to one of America's most divisive debates. Since that decision, nearly a third of states have implemented near-total bans on the procedure, while access to abortion is severely restricted in several others. On Monday, President Joe Biden's election campaign slammed his rival Donald Trump, accusing him of being the, quote, sole person responsible for this nightmare.
Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is in Washington, D.C. for what he's described as critical talks on the fighting in Gaza and the escalating tensions on the border with Lebanon. As FSN's Benji Hire reports.
At the fore of these discussions, twin intertwined conflicts with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, both Iran-backed militias launching attacks on Israel. Hezbollah began cross-border strikes into northern Israel in support of Hamas and pledges not to stop until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hinted at a possible temporary truce in the Palestinian territory 8 months into his army's devastating offensive into the enclave. He wants to see the release of Israeli hostages still held in the Strip before then resuming military activities. That falls short of a US-endorsed proposal for a deal that would usher in a permanent ceasefire. Benji Hire, Washington.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
Our Matrix server is about as free as internet chat can be. Join the existing rooms or create your own at chat.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
We return with Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Thanks for listening, everyone. Find Liberty Conspiracy Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Rockfin, Rumble, YouTube, and my X, which is at Guard Goldsmith. And, of course, you can find the show after the fact on all the video platforms that I just mentioned. And if you want to join me over at Substack, that's a great place to find articles. Every Sunday, you'll find the Sunday News Assembly, which has at least 20 pieces, news pieces on breaking stories that pertain to liberty, plus contextual information to help split those news stories apart and get long-lasting information for freedom that you can carry with you for the future. Want to continue our conversation about this Title IX decision in a federal district court and offer a bit of context that hopefully we can apply to future situations. When looking at the concept of Title IX, the federal government funding colleges, so-called equality under the government, which takes our money and defines what equality is, and more than that, when we look at the Supreme Court and its history.
Offering emotional satisfaction but little intellectual, constitutional, or moral completeness, a federal district court judge Thursday issued an injunction against the Biden administration enforcing so-called Title IX equal opportunity in education mandates on states to include trans men posing as women or women posing as men. Let's see why celebration might not be appropriate here. Hi, everyone. I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC TV. And here's the story. Timothy Narazi reports for Fox News, quote, U.S. District Judge Terry Doughty granted a preliminary injunction on Thursday and referred to the Biden administration's unilateral Title IX changes as a threat to democracy, end quote, which hints at big lessons wrapped inside this news package. As Judge Doughty ought to know, the U.S. Constitution set up a representative republic, supposedly constraining the government by limiting those issues on which the representatives could vote in their majority pocket of pseudo-democracy within Congress. Democracy is gang rule, and there's no democracy to be applauded in the U.S. There is no threatened democracy in the U.S. because the system isn't a demos. It's a republic with strict limits that are legible within the Constitution. As a result, Judge Doughty more appropriately could have said that the Biden administration's unilateral Title IX changes are a threat to the U.S. Constitution via arbitrary executive branch expansion of Title IX of the Education Amendments that was enacted in 1972. Why does it take a non-judge talking about this issue? Why does it take someone outside the government to remind the tax-paid judge about this reality? Likewise, should it be up to me and perhaps you, the viewer, to mention to the judge or people involved with government that there are deeper problems here? Problems stemming from that 1972 statute itself? Well, we'll dig into those problems in a moment. Right now, let's see more of what, for some conservatives, is an issue to celebrate. To celebrate because they have understandably become upset about the rising tide of wokeism and trans ideology in public education. Narazi reports that Doughty's injunction is based on what we've come to expect from supposedly conservative judges, a finding of offense in the process of the Biden administration expanding Title IX parameters, not a problem with Title IX itself. Quote, this case demonstrates the abuse of power by executive federal agencies in the rulemaking process, Doughty said in his ruling. The separation of powers and system of checks and balances exist in this country for a reason. Doughty ruled that the changes were inadmissible because the term gender discrimination, as used in the establishment of Title IX, only included discrimination against biological males and females at the time of enactment, end quote. So Judge Doughty correctly cited biological truth, which might give hope to Americans concerned about the cultural Marxist postmodernist move to rewrite the laws of nature, manipulate the language, and broaden the laws of the U.S. to hand out special favors to new government-favored special interests. But will the supporters of Judge Doughty's decision think about the larger problem? The judge's cozy but ill-informed use of the pat mantra, checks and balances, indicates that he hasn't thought about the larger issue, that instead he equates an expansion of Title IX that might be done through Congress rather than the Biden administration to something acceptable, something in keeping with that wondrous checks and balances term that he probably picked up in grade school. The checks are in the Constitution. And only by seeing the area of the Constitution that's being manipulated by Title IX itself can one begin to safeguard against future manipulation of the language, degradation of federalism, and attacks on the Constitution. According to the tax-fueled U.S. government's own U.S. Courts website, the key lever for the 1972 Title IX boosters at the time to promote their original imposition on colleges, high schools, and other educational institutions was, of course, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, as I mentioned last week, the belief that equal handouts by government, handouts that are funded through extraction of wealth from others, the belief that handouts are the same thing as equal protection against person-on-person aggression shows us how far afield most Americans, especially politicians and judges, are from the original conception of government as being a protector rather than a provider of handouts. It is this contemporary reimagining of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, the actual text of the Equal Protection Clause, that they have reshaped, that is the linchpin of Title IX, and of Biden's attempt to unilaterally expand it. So, as the U.S. government explains, quote, Congress enacted Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, which requires that no person be excluded from participation in, denied the benefits of, or subjected to discrimination on the basis of sex under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. It authorizes any federal agency that provides such assistance to issue regulations to enforce the prohibition of sex discrimination. It also allows termination of financial assistance when an institution does not voluntarily comply, end quote. Now, after failed court challenges from Grove City College in Pennsylvania and Hillsdale College in Michigan to block enforcement of Title IX, in private universities that got federal grants, Congress expanded the provisions of the original 1972 statute to apply to any educational institution that even had students receiving federal financial aid, so-called, for school from the federal government. As the feds tell us on their exciting website, the stuffed shirts passed the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987, quote, which clarifies that a program or activity for purposes of Title IX and other civil rights laws refers to all operations of an institution whenever federal financial assistance is extended to any part of the institution, end quote. The fact that the U.S. Constitution doesn't allow the feds to offer financial assistance to colleges or other educational institutions seems completely unimportant to Congress, to many judges, to many Americans, and even to many state-level politicians. Thus, only the expansion of Title IX mandates to cover trans people was questioned by the states involved in the challenge: Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, and Idaho. Title IX itself, well, it remains to insult the founders and leave the door open to Congress amending the law in order to include, you got it, trans people. Even a small victory such as this from Judge Doughty overlooks deep legislative problems that undercut the Constitution and leave a place for fallacious conception of the 14th Amendment, and of course, for a bad conception of the role of government in American life. It's more a learning opportunity right now than it is a legal victory. It's a ruling that tells us we might want to expand the number of people who understand the deeper issues involved. As long as tax money is thrown into education, the disputes over how it will be used in education will persist. At least the Constitution shows us that no federal money is to be used in this manner. And then from there, it's up to the residents of each state to handle what they do and hopefully get government out of education entirely. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please like and subscribe. Find us on Rumble, where they don't censor us, and follow us there. Share the videos as often as you can. And do visit us at YouTube, where they do censor us. Yes, that's true. And make sure that you are still subscribed there. You can.
All right. And big thanks to the MRC TV team, too, for being so kind. And to you, I hope you've had an absolutely stellar day, a beautiful day. And I hope you're heading into a great night as well. By the way, everybody, you know, behind the scenes, while that was playing, my first computer on which I actually start the stream, and then I send the invite out to my second computer so that I can connect all of the stuff that I show you on screen. And I use that first computer as, like, you know, my control computer. That one, actually, I forgot to plug it in, and it got down to 0 power. And amazingly, the way that system works, that video continued to play because the signal was still going out, as far as I know. Now, if it stopped or anything like that, let me know. Inside Rockford, Rumble, chat, anything like that. I mean, our tech team here at Liberty Conspiracy, we have a very large team, of course, and very, very, very intense on the budget for those guys. So thank you, guys. I think you were able to watch that whole video, and you didn't have any interruption. Let me know if there was any interruption. But if it was good for you, that is just a super plus for me. That's just great. I really am psyched. I hope you got to see the whole thing. Let me know if you got to see the whole thing. That would be fantastic. I want to make sure you're able to check it out. Melanie says, no such thing as trans. Well stated. Absolutely. And about that book, I believe Rogue Statement Inside Rumble says, now I have 2 things to read. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I hope I can get an interview with that man, because I think the 90-something% of what he had to say, I'm really interested in seeing how, people like the Bushes and so on were supportive of the Nazis for quite a while. And, of course, we know about their banking interests and things like that. So let me know inside Rockford and Rumble chat. Inside also X. If you got to see all that video, that's awesome. Give me the heads up on that. And if anything went wrong, just let me know. But I want to add to that, thanks to Natalie Morris, because she offered some very good coverage of this story from Redacted this afternoon. And so here we go. In this state of confusion, yes, the tragedy of the commons, women and men, you've got to do everything equally, even though they might not have the same sort of interest for people. And so that means that maybe we should change people's brains and force them to have equal interest in men and women's sports. Obviously, the people are the problem, and we should just, do surgery on them to fix that. Maybe the government can make everything fair that way. Here's Natalie with her report.
Free report.
Indeed. Well, a federal court has struck down Title IX in 6 states. Those are the 6 states that sued to stop it. Now, this is the law that the Biden administration put into place to destroy women's rights in education. The states now that have this, they no longer have to implement them, meaning this would be a good place to go to college, ladies, is Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. Now, look how this opinion, this court decision started. This is shocking, right? In the year 2024, that a court has to say this, and that they had the ovaries to say it.
They had the balls to say it.
The lack of balls to say it. This is the opinion. There are 2 sexes, male and female. That's how the court puts down this ruling. Now, why do they have to say this in the year 2024? Because we don't know that by default any longer. But they lay out the fact that Title IX was meant to give women an advantage that they don't already have in certain places. For instance, some sports are more popular for men, so women don't get the funding for their sports. Historically, colleges had more resources, let's say for dormitories or classrooms for boys. So Title IX made it so that the schools would have to invest equally so that women had equal opportunity in sports, in scholarship, in housing, in study programs, all of this. Now, the states had argued that, what the Biden administration wanted to do was say that Title IX programs could be used by men whose gender identity was women. So you no longer had to be a biological woman to take advantage of these programs, which meant that men can and do self-identify into programs where they would have these advantages that were not meant for them. They were meant for biological women. And the states had argued that forcing them to expand the definition of biological sex to gender identification would violate their First Amendment right to define women as women. And the court ruled that the states correctly argued that the new rule redefining sex to include gender identity would violate government employees' First Amendment rights and is the result of arbitrary and capricious rulemaking.
Okay, so let's stop right there, because the facet that I got into on my MRC TV report focused on the fact that they said that the executive branch had done this, and it's in an arbitrary way that they expanded Title IX. Natalie's report brings up the other facet of it, which, in fact, while I shot the video for it, I even mentioned to the guys, I said, I could have gone into the unconstitutional conditions portions of this, but I should show you the raw footage. But I was like, that would have been another 500 words. It would have been more like a dissertation, because the article was already like, 1,100 words or something like that I wrote on Sunday. And this is the key. You know how I always talk about unconstitutional conditions? This is it right here. This First Amendment portion of this Title IX ruling. Now, this isn't the Supreme Court. This is Judge Doughty on the Federal District Court. But Judge Doughty ruled, basically, without explicitly saying it, that it's an unconstitutional condition. You can't say, hey, schools, you are going to get money and you must conform to Title IX. And you've got to now change what you're saying about men and women, about the meaning of men and women, because that is an infringement of the First Amendment. So it's an unconstitutional condition. Just like I mentioned with Cabrini Green, the housing place outside of Chicago, where they ruled you can't make it conditional that people have to give up their so-called Fourth Amendment right, the right protected by the Fourth Amendment against unwarranted searches and seizures if you want to live in a federally subsidized housing place under Section 8. So this is the Section 8 version, but under the First Amendment rather than the Fourth Amendment, and it applies to trans people. This is the unconstitutional condition thing that I've mentioned so many times. This is why it's so key to understand that and to recognize here you've got the hypocrisy. Because what did they do for Title IX itself with Grove City? As I mentioned in my piece, Grove City and Hillsdale College, right? What they did there was they abridged the right to contract. So if they're accepting students and the students are going to be paying them, that is a contract for Grove City, Hillsdale College, any other college, right? The stipulation that they put on those schools under Title IX when it was passed in 1972, and then there were all these challenges. And I'm going to go through some of that. You can see it hyperlinked in my article, actually, the history of the challenges in it. It's a very key part of the program that I wanted to put forward tonight. This really puts together a very, very solid chunk of scholarship and learning here, because this goes into a number of other cases like the Grove City and Hillsdale College cases where the Supreme Court reversed itself in unconstitutional condition land. So you've got Cabrini Green, where they claim you can't force people to give up the right that's protected by the Fourth Amendment, but the right to contract is also supposed to be protected by the U.S. Constitution. And the United States government was telling Hillsdale College and Grove City College, no, if you have these students join your college and you had them join you under certain stipulations, which was you have X, Y, and Z male sports teams, but you only have X female sports teams, you don't have as many, we're going to change that. That is up to us. We're going to change that. Well, that's the right of free association. They're not supposed to abridge that. It's also the right of free speech and free expression, right? If they're putting on presentations, if they're doing anything to promote these things, it's all wrapped up in there. All of those little nuances are part of these considerations. But that wasn't part of the Supreme Court decision in Grove City and Hillsdale. What did they tell Grove City and Hillsdale? Title IX, you must conform. But in this case, Judge Doughty has said he's going against the Hillsdale College, Grove City College precedent because he's seeing a new angle on this. It's the First Amendment on what do you say is a man or woman. The university staff should be able to say that men are men and women are women. It's a First Amendment thing. When technically speaking, you could break down any of those sports things and apply some facet of the First Amendment, the Third Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, all sorts of things within the Bill of Rights. The takings clause saying the government is going to be taking your opportunity to do with your administrative monies as you wish. You're going to have to apply this amount of money to women's sports. There's so many ways that you could apply the U.S. government forcing colleges to accept men and women equally and have the exact same number of sports teams. And again, if it's the problem of the universities, then why is it the problem of the universities to not have, and I'm looking not at the trans thing now, but at the Title IX implications. If it's the problem of the universities that they're somehow unfairly not having the same number of sports teams for men and women, then who's at fault for that? Their discriminatory powers here are based on, or their decisions are based on discriminating between what is financially best or not financially best, and then trying to mix that in with what would be attractive for consumers to come to our school, that sort of thing. What balance can we get of women's sports, men's sports, that we'd like to do this for women, but we just can't afford it. We don't have the money, that sort of thing, right? So they work out all these different factors, and they say, okay, but who's really at fault there? The people who don't attend the women's sports. As I said, what are you going to have surgery on all the brains of potential sports attendees to say, now I'm going to go to the women's sports, right? At a certain point, you get into Harrison Bergeron land. You get into Ursula Le Guin's Lathe of Heaven land, where the people who are going to make everything just right have to constantly adjust everything inside every human being who has a different opinion on things. And again, it's because they won't allow for free association. Because they think that they can replace free association, that free association, if it ends up seeing someone distinguish between what they prefer on this and what they prefer on this, and what they preferred is not the government preference, then they're going to take control of that. They're going to silence that. It might have to do with your posts on social media. It might have to do with the university's decision about having a women's basketball team versus a guys basketball team, or a bowling team, or whatever it might be, right? All these nuances should be left up to free will, and then we can express our preferences. They won't allow that expression if it's the preferences of a university because the feds give them money, or in the case of Grove City, as you saw in my report, because even the students receive money that then gets voluntarily handed to the university of their choice. Thank you for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Watch us every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. at Rockfin, Rumble, now YouTube, and my Twitter/X, which is at Guard Goldsmith.
Thank you for great money-saving ideas. I'm Holland Cook with Inflation Hacks. Among recent suggestions submitted to the blog, double-check your checking and bank accounts for those trial subscriptions and memberships that have become permanent if you don't cancel them, which many, possibly most, don't or forget to. You may not have noticed small automatic payments. 2 energy-saving tips for the kitchen. If you cover and wrap foods in the fridge, you will prevent moisture from escaping and ask less of the compressor. Use plastic wrap, not aluminum foil, and you should only run the dishwasher when it's full. Several who posted are selling their gently used clothing online at Poshmark or Depop, DEPOP.com. How are you coping? Post your inflation hacks on the blog at andyoucanquoteme.com.
There are basically 2 types of advertising, direct response and branding. Radio's great for direct response with its low cost to listener ratio, but audio can't be beat for branding, which is a longer term endeavor. You want to be the first thing that someone thinks of when they think about your product or service. If you have a local business that you want kept top of mind in your community, call the station. If you need national reach, Free Talk Live's got around 200 radio stations, millions of monthly listening sessions, can suit all budgets, and if we don't think we're right for you, we'll tell you. Email me, mark@freetalklive.com.
Tired of cancel culture? Sick of mega tech corporations holding an axe over your head? Join the LRN.FM Matrix chat server. It's self-hosted, so no one else can tell us what to do or say. Don't like the existing channels? You can make your own. You can even connect into some of our channels from other Matrix servers. It's federated. For the full LRN.FM Matrix experience, though, you should join our server via the step-by-step instructions at chat.lrn.fm. Chat.lrn.fm.
The latest episode of Free Talk Live continues with Hour 3 up next after the news here at listen.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Boeing could be criminally charged, as has been recommended by US prosecutors investigating 2 fatal crashes of their MAX planes 6 years ago. The US Department of Justice has until July the 7th to decide whether to charge or extend a deal that avoids prosecution. Ever since Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
346 people died in 2 Boeing MAX 7 crashes on Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines in 2018 and 2019. That fleet was grounded for 2 years, and it was then found a new design had dipped the nose of those planes automatically to compensate for shifting the larger engines forward. Boeing made a deal with the Department of Justice in 2021 in which it agreed to pay out $2.5 billion worth of penalties and compensations to the customers and families of those who died. Well, the DOJ now has a couple of weeks to decide whether to file criminal charges against that major US plane manufacturer. Caroline Malone, Washington.
Monday marks 2 years since the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right to abortions. It's become a key political issue for voters, with access to terminations expected to play a key role in November's presidential election. Ever since Sally Patterson reports from New York.
For nearly 5 decades, Americans were guaranteed constitutional protections for abortions. A landmark ruling by the Supreme Court in 1973 cemented women's right to choose in a case known as Roe v. Wade. But exactly 2 years ago, that ruling was overturned, opening the floodgates to one of America's most divisive debates. Since that decision, nearly a third of states have implemented near-total bans on the procedure, while access to abortion is severely restricted in several others. On Monday, President Joe Biden's election campaign slammed his rival Donald Trump, accusing him of being the, quote, sole person responsible for this nightmare.
Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is in Washington, D.C. for what he's described as critical talks on the fighting in Gaza and the escalating tensions on the border with Lebanon. As Ever Since Benji Hire reports.
At the fore of these discussions, twin intertwined conflicts with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, both Iran-backed militias launching attacks on Israel. Hezbollah began cross-border strikes into northern Israel in support of Hamas and pledges not to stop until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hinted at a possible temporary truce in the Palestinian territory 8 months into his army's devastating offensive into the enclave. He wants to see the release of Israeli hostages still held in the Strip before then resuming military activities. That falls short of a US-endorsed proposal for a deal that would usher in a permanent ceasefire. Benji Hire, Washington.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks. Today, the upcoming treason trial in Russia of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. It is due to begin on Wednesday in the city of Yekaterinburg, where the journalist was arrested nearly 15 months ago. Miriam Elder is with America's Council on Foreign Relations.
The state is accusing Evan of espionage, a charge that he, the Wall Street Journal, and the U.S. government vehemently deny. And most cases involving national security are held in secret, so no journalists will be allowed in the courtroom. And the State Department said this week that they'll try to have embassy officials inside, but they're not sure if that'll be allowed. More than 99% of Russian court cases end in conviction. The judge on this trial once told an interviewer that he's only ever acquitted 3 or 4 people in his 20-plus year career. So since for most trials in Russia, you can fairly confidently expect a guilty verdict, a lot of attention is put on sentencing. Evan faces up to 20 years in prison. There is counterintuitively a window of optimism here, though. In those cases where Russia engages in prisoner swaps or releases people early, it tends to do so after a verdict has been handed down. So that Evan's case is moving ahead could give some hope that some sort of a swap might be possible.
Since his arrest, Evan Gershkovich has been held in Lefortovo prison, a Tsarist-era jail in Moscow, known for its Spartan conditions and the isolation in which inmates are held. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
And the main news again, Boeing could be criminally charged. It's been recommended by US prosecutors. The Department of Justice is now deciding whether to take matters forward. This Monday marks 2 years since the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right to abortions, and Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is in Washington, D.C. for what he's described as critical talks on the fighting in Gaza. That's Feature Story News. Nick Harper reporting.
Despite a long-held consensus pointing to the mid-20s as the final stage of brain maturation, a new study has found that the adolescent brain doesn't fully form until boys have avenged their father's murder.
New imaging studies suggest that the frontal cortex goes through extensive changes during the period of training when an adolescent boy prepares himself to track down and kill the man who took his father's life. But it's not until the boy stares deep into the murderer's eyes and then stabs him right in the heart that the two lobes fuse into a fully mature brain.
According to Dr. Laurie's findings, the myelin surrounding the teenage nerve synapses develops when boys stake out the home of their father's murderer, put themselves through grueling physical training, and fantasize again and again about how satisfying it will be when he finally makes the bastard who took everything from him beg for his life.
Now, if they let their father's killer slip through their grasp, or if they press the barrel of a gun to the back of his head and then realize they don't have what it takes to pull the trigger, then the amygdala is definitively stunted, and they'll have lifelong problems interpreting emotional information.
This is the Onion News Network.
You can stick it to the man and big tech. Join our FTL social mastodon at social.freetalklive.com.
Free Talk Live. Welcome back to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Watch us Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on Rumble, Rockfin, YouTube, and my X at Guard Goldsmith. Let's get started, shall we? Let's get it started. We're going to get into the news flash with a visit from those wild alien funkmeisters, the P-Funk All-Stars.
So you said recently that you thought that you, as an outspoken critic, could be a target yourself. Some people think that sounds overdramatic, but I'm right there with you. I think that he is so vindictive that he will go after however he has to, through the IRS maybe, or even through sponsors to get us off the air maybe, and or you. How seriously should we be taking that?
Well, so I was asked, am I worried about me? And my answer was, I'm worried about all of us. I'm no more worried about me than I am worried about everybody in the country.
Yes? Oh, hello. Hello. We're Mary's parents. Oh, well, come on in, fellas. Hold it a second. Mary's parents burned to death last year. Wait a minute. I know you guys. You're from the News Flash.
Well, earlier on Wednesday, the IDF and Hezbollah exchanged a fresh series of strikes across the border. Well, according to the Israeli military, approximately 15 projectiles were detected, which the IDF retaliated to by shelling the source of the launches inside Lebanon. Now, there's no word as yet about any casualties on either side. Ahead of that, as well, a series of deadly airstrikes by Israel was carried out on southern Lebanon.
You're from the News Flash.
The Israeli military announced yesterday that it's ready to invade Lebanon with, quote, operational plans for an attack approved. The Israeli foreign minister has threatened to annihilate the Hezbollah militant group based there.
You're from the news flash.
New York now, where scuffles have broken out between rival protesters in Brooklyn amid an event hosted by a local Jewish group to auction off Palestinian land in the Middle East.
You're from the news flash.
I can only apologize for the American weapon that wounded you. I'm sorry.
Yes, my friends. Yes. Boy, we're going to have a busy night tonight. And Tom Cooper's coming too. I can't wait. And I want to invite you to drop your comments into the chat and all that stuff on any of the platforms. Want to check one thing on the screen here. Just double checking on my audio. Yes, it's coming through great. On Monday, it reverted back to my my camera microphone, but this is my wonderful mic right here. It's not even as great as, some people go super high octane nitro fueled microphone action, but this is a pretty good one. I appreciate it very much, and it looks something from Pink Floyd. Like a weird Pink Floyd album or something like that. But yeah, Tom Cooper's going to be here with us at 7:15. I can't wait. That's going to be great. I want to drop your comments inside X. I can see them. Remember, everybody, thanks to the good folks at StreamYard. I want to welcome everybody like Jason Barker, Michelle Obama, man, 5x5. Thank you. You rock. Reese, hey Reese. Buenos noches. Buenos tardes. I dig it, baby. Buenos tardes, if you're still a fan of Doctor Who. And yes, the super multi-colorful, crazy action that Freegan brought us first in at Rumble. And he says, guard, won't you take me to Big Bad Funky Town? Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, yes. And I see Texas Coast South is there. Freegan is just rocking it with everybody and welcoming everyone. He's sort of like the great welcomer. Hey, Handy's there. Hi, Handy. Good to see you, man, in a manner of speaking. And I got to get in touch with you. I want to schedule time we can, chat with you on the show and touch base with that great mind and the skills that you have and all the experiences that you have. It's going to be an extended show. It's going to be all your experiences. You're just going to suck them up and you're going to have nothing left in your brain. All right, everybody, let's get to a couple things. Before we get into our major stories, I do want to do one thing with the news flash. I want to remind us, you saw that heard and saw the graphics of Rachel Maddow and Joy Behar doing their wonderful thing. Let's just go back and do a quick reminder of them as we hear their audio telling us about how worried they are. And again, I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump, but ladies, kindly remember perhaps what has already been done to, people who didn't hold opinions like you and actually were correct about things like the jabs, Rachel. As you say, it would stop everything, and there was absolutely no evidence by which you could make that claim. The memories of our speech being censored thanks to, $3.5 million being given by the FBI to Twitter and NewsGuard coming after me for a report on something else we'll get to in just a little while later tonight about masks and things like that. Well, let's listen to these blowhards once more on The View.
So you said recently that you thought that you, as an outspoken critic, could be a target yourself. Some people think that sounds overdramatic, but I'm right there with you. I think that he is so vindictive that he will go after however he has to, through the IRS maybe, or even...
Okay, so I don't know, maybe Joy Behar, again, maybe it's just a short memory, midnight oil sort of thing. Maybe she is not familiar with the letter L. This episode of Sesame Street brought to you by L and L for Lois Lerner. I don't know. Maybe she's not familiar with the Obama administration targeting conservatives at, say, the Western Journalism Center and others through the IRS. I just don't remember. Evidently, that wasn't important to her. That just is insignificant. They're just the peons. They don't matter in any way whatsoever. They should have been suppressed because, of course, they had wrongthink. And it's the same thing with all you evil people who were actually right, and you knew it at the time, about things like the misuse of the word pandemic, the misuse of the PCR tests, the misapplication of the masks, because, of course, the masks weren't going to stop the viral particles. All that stuff. The way the money was put through EcoHealth Alliance, the way Anthony Fauci was lying, the way that they incentivized hospitals and medical centers to say that people who had turned up positive with the ramped up PCR test, which had a 95% false positive beyond about 35 cycles, then, you get to a point where you say to yourself, hey, I'd like to criticize this stuff and say, hey, Deborah Birx, why are you incentivizing hospitals to claim that people died from COVID when they just ended up having a positive PCR test? Why are you financially doing that with my money? And Joy Behar doesn't care, and Rachel Maddow. Now they're very concerned, even though it was the Obama-Biden administration that tried to use the Espionage Act, originally passed during World War I and also unconstitutional. I read a little bit about that when I was at Studio 2 in Mother Russia the other day from a very cool book. All those things that seem to have happened, they don't remember the Espionage Act being used or attempted to be used by the Obama administration more times than all presidents combined, going back to the passage of the Espionage Act. I don't know. It's Russian propaganda, you guys. Let's just keep spewing that fake Russian propaganda, huh? That's right. We got to trust.
Through sponsors to get us off the air, maybe, or you.
Yeah, sponsors, sort of like what NewsGuard. They might pressure sponsors to get us off the air, which is exactly what NewsGuard does to people like my friends at MRC TV and me on contract with MRC TV. But, if you know Joy, and don't we all know Joy when we watch Joy? Yeah, if you know Joy, like I know Joy, then if you can pass a message on to Joy and just tell her, hey, Joy, I'd love to chat with you because I think you've forgotten a few things. We'll share some time. We'll sing a song. It'll be wicked great. And I'll put on my New York accent. It'll be just fantastic. It'll be great, Joy. Thank you. I love Joy.
How seriously should we be taking that?
And then Rachel Maddow says she's not concerned about herself. She's a paladin for the other people.
Well, so I was asked, am I worried about me? And my answer was, I'm worried about all of us. I'm no more worried about me than I am worried about everyone.
Oh, thank you, Joy. Thank you so much. You care so much about me. I appreciate that greatly. That's wonderful. Aren't you all happy about that? Drop your comments in the chat and let's get rocking, my friends. Yes, and let's continue with some memory mints from yesterday. Remember yesterday when the entire state of Massachusetts lost its 911 during one of the hottest days so far this year, when like old people might be calling 911 to get help? Because, well, yeah. So, well, they got it back. They got 911 back, and that's just awesome. So let's hear from Howie Carr, as he mentioned, of course, that we know 911 was working so well yesterday.
I know it's really tough. The 911 system is down. It's in Massachusetts. What does it say on the phones? It keeps ringing. 911 services are currently down statewide. Delays in public safety response may occur.
So get up and get down. 911 is joking your town. Get up and get down. Late 911, where's the late clown? Get up and get down. 911 is joking your town. Get up and get down. Late 911, where's the late clown?
911 services are currently down statewide. Delays in public safety response may occur.
And let's remind ourselves of something else. So we have world destruction coming in just a minute. Let's not forget that, yes, there's even more that we can enjoy. Who could forget this special guest star in United States history, everybody? Benny! Benny and the Jets.
Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel. We had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I said, "Give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster."
Okay, I think we understand the meaning of tools. Thanks, Sally. Yes, it was Sally, Charlie Brown's sister. I just want what I deserve. I just want what's coming to me. Yeah, I think we know what's coming to you eventually. Inside X, I can't believe that's the name that this cool individual uses. Says, "Joy, joy, joy, oh boy. Bless her heart. She's a sweetheart. She's a skinwalker." And then he's got Uncle Benny. But Benny and the Jets. Oh, man, I'm telling you, we got so much wild stuff tonight. It is going to be absolutely nutty. So, okay, let me just double check my schedule here. Oh, yep, you know what it's time for, everybody. You saw the little preview. It's time for our music theme as we get into, you got it, my friends, warfare.
Speak about destruction. Speak about destruction. Speak about destruction. This is a world destruction. Your life ain't nothing. A human race is becoming a disgrace. Countries ain't fighting in chemical war.
Yeah, well, how could they possibly fight in chemical warfare when we all know that the Ukrainians never had any chemical and biological plants, did they?
Communist relationship won't stand in the way of the Islamic force. The CIA is looking for undetectors. The KGB.
All right, everybody. All right. Thank you, theme makers. Awesome stuff from Time Zone World Destruction, the one-off single. Yeah. So let's first turn to some of the footage from the Middle East, my friends. You saw that in the flash. We'll get some more details. You got it. Israel struck Lebanon in response to Lebanon attacking Israel. And Israel is portraying it, as are many American officials, as Israel is defending itself. But you saw in the preview, the Hezbollah forces in Lebanon, supposedly Hezbollah, were responding themselves with that blast to Israeli aggression. So it's perfect gaslighting. It's typical gaslighting. Israel goes and blasts Lebanon. Lebanon responds, and then the West comes out and says, Israel responded to to Hezbollah aggression. Okay, let's get more details about this because Israel is really ramping it up, and we'll see more. They're saying they're prepared to go all-out war with Lebanon now.
Well, earlier on Wednesday, the IDF and Hezbollah exchanged a fresh series of strikes across the border.
All right, so we saw that stuff. We saw it all. We know what's happening. But let's get a little bit more here because, as he mentioned, it was supposedly in response. Well, let's check this out right here. Here it is.
It has intercepted several rockets fired into Israel from neighboring Lebanon by the Hezbollah militant group. According to the Israeli military, approximately 15 projectiles were detected from across the border. The IDF added that its artillery retaliated by shelling the source of the launches inside Lebanon. There's no word about any casualties on either side. This comes shortly after Israel hit southern Lebanon with airstrikes.
Oh, what was that? Oh, shortly after they hit southern Lebanon with airstrikes. Ah, yes. Thank you, RT, for getting the information out there. Let's continue.
The The two sides have been exchanging cross-border rocket attacks for months. The Israeli military announced yesterday that it's ready to invade Lebanon with, quote, operational plans for an attack approved. The Israeli foreign minister has threatened to annihilate the Hezbollah militant group based there.
We are very close to the moment of decision to change the rules against Hezbollah in Lebanon. In all-out war, Hezbollah will be destroyed and Lebanon will be severely hit.
The Israeli foreign minister's harsh comments were in response to Hezbollah drone footage demonstrating its surveillance of multiple locations in Israel. The almost 10 minutes of video shows the Israeli port city of Haifa, less than 30 kilometers from the Lebanese border. The daytime footage films both civilian and military areas, including an arms manufacturing complex with missile defense systems indicated. The head of Hezbollah warned back in November that they're using surveillance drones over Haifa. A senior U.S. advisor in Lebanon tried to calm the escalating situation between Hezbollah and Israel during his recent visit to Beirut.
But let me be clear. The conflict along the blue line between Israel and Hezbollah has gone on for long enough. Innocent people are dying, property is damaged, families are shattered, and the Lebanese economy continues to decline. The country is suffering for no good reason. It's in everyone's interest to resolve it quickly and diplomatically.
Well, let's take a look at the capacities of both the IDF and Hezbollah fighters. A major Washington think tank says Hezbollah is able to mount an effective counterattack against Israeli forces, and the group is estimated to own up to 200,000 rockets and missiles. It also boasts around 30,000 active fighters. Meanwhile, the head of the IDF recently reported a lack of soldiers in order to, quote, fulfill its missions. We discussed the escalating conflict with Ecuadorian journalist Esteban Carrillo, who says Israel doesn't have the capability to fight on a second front.
I would say Israel is at this point selling smoke. This is a complete pipe dream. Israel is not ready to open up a front against Hezbollah. Look at what's happening in the Gaza Strip. It's been 8 months and the resistance continues to fight day in, day out. Israeli commentators and army officials keep saying that the Palestinian resistance has managed to replenish itself despite the devastation caused in Gaza. Now consider Hezbollah a force much larger than Hamas, much better equipped, much better trained, much better positioned, and who has essentially blinded Israel in the north. This is one of the reasons why we have this unprecedented footage of reconnaissance drones flying over the Israeli north, showing facilities, sensitive military facilities, where they keep the submarines, where they, the Rafael defense factories. It's something that you could have never imagined just, a year ago. Now today we see that the stage has completely changed. So these statements from the Israeli army and from the Israeli foreign minister, is just another of these grandiloquent statements that they like to make themselves sound tough, despite the fact that we now know that they are not ready to fight a war against Hamas, who is the smallest faction within the axis of resistance.
Let's get a little bit more here. Let's get a little bit rowdy as we go back to the studios with Ewan O'Neill from RT, and we hear some more about how Hezbollah is responding to this very threatening statement from the Israeli government. And, it's amazing to be in the United States and, yes, have to look at this stuff. Why? Because of collectivism. It's wonderful. The state is so great. It leads us to this.
The leader of the Hezbollah militant group has warned Israel that nowhere in the nation will be spared from its weapons in the event of a full-blown war. That fiery comment came in response to Israeli threats to destroy the paramilitary organization.
The enemy knows well that we have prepared ourselves for the wars and that no place will be spared our rockets. Israel must wait for us on land, by sea, and by air.
Yeah, good evening to you, Yunan. Well, Hassan Nasrallah, the chief of Hezbollah, has indeed just finished his speech that is already making headlines around the world. The key messages: the attacks on northern Israel will continue in order to weaken Israel's assaults on Gaza.
Thanks for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Remember, join us every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on Rockfin, Rumble, my X/Twitter at Gard Goldsmith, and now on YouTube. And you can also head over to my Substack, the Gardner Goldsmith Substack, and you'll find the Sunday News Assembly there every Sunday with lots of big stories about individual liberty. Thanks, everyone.
Some of you have wanted to support Free Talk Live's mission on a monthly basis, but don't want to support Patreon. Now we have an alternative that also helps our premier streaming platform, Odyssey. Visit video.freetalklive.com and click Join at the top of the channel. You can subscribe for $5 per month, and unlike other subscription services, Odyssey adds their processing fee on top, so it'll cost a little over $5 per month, but Free Talk Live will receive the entire amount you pledged. Higher donation tiers are available if you're feeling so inspired. You'll get a special membership badge that's visible in the Odyssey chat room, and if we get enough supporters, we may enable members-only chat. This new subscription method is a great way to decentralize our direct listener support away from just Patreon and also support a libertarian-run business, Odyssey. Please visit video.freetalklive.com and click Join to subscribe to our Odyssey channel and help support spreading our message around the planet. Visit video.freetalklive.com and click Join today.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Boeing could be criminally charged, as has been recommended by US prosecutors investigating 2 fatal crashes of their MAX planes 6 years ago. The US Department of Justice has until July the 7th to decide whether to charge or extend a deal that avoids prosecution. FSN's Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
346 people died in 2 Boeing MAX 7 crashes on Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines in 2018 and 2019. That fleet was grounded for 2 years, and it was then found a new design had dipped the nose of those planes automatically to compensate for shifting the larger engines forward. Boeing made a deal with the Department of Justice in 2021 in which it agreed to pay out $2.5 billion worth of penalties and compensations to the customers and families of those who died. Well, the DOJ now has a couple of weeks to decide whether to file criminal charges against that major US plane manufacturer. Caroline Malone, Washington.
Monday marks 2 years since the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right to abortions. It's become a key political issue for voters, with access to terminations expected to play a key role in November's presidential election. FSN's Sally Patterson reports from New York.
For nearly 5 decades, Americans were guaranteed constitutional protections for abortions. A landmark ruling by the Supreme Court in 1973 cemented women's right to choose in a case known as Roe v. Wade. But exactly 2 years ago, that ruling was overturned, opening the floodgates to one of America's most divisive debates. Since that decision, nearly a third of states have implemented near-total bans on the procedure, while access to abortion is severely restricted in several others. On Monday, President Joe Biden's election campaign slammed his rival Donald Trump, accusing him of being the, quote, sole person responsible for this nightmare.
Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is in Washington, D.C. for what he's described as critical talks on the fighting in Gaza and the escalating tensions on the border with Lebanon, as FSN's Benji Hire reports.
At the fore of these discussions, twin intertwined conflicts with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, both Iran-backed militias launching attacks on Israel. Hezbollah began cross-border strikes into northern Israel in support of Hamas and pledges not to stop until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hinted at a possible temporary truce in the Palestinian territory 8 months into his army's devastating offensive into the enclave. He wants to see the release of Israeli hostages still held in the Strip before then resuming military activities. That falls short of a US-endorsed proposal for a deal that would usher in a permanent ceasefire. Benji Hire, Washington.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
Don't miss a moment of Free Talk Live. Get our archives daily via our podcast at feeds.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
This is Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. I'm Gardner Goldsmith, and thanks for listening. You can tune in live every Monday through Friday on Rockfin, Rumble, on YouTube now, and my Twitter/X at Gard Goldsmith. Let's get right into it, talking about how the state engages in war against all of us. IDF approves operational plans for offensive in Lebanon, from Kyle Anzalone, who's doing a lot of the fill-in right now while Dave DeCamp is on vacation at Anti-War. He's on for 2 weeks in Australia. They say Israeli officials say Tel Aviv is preparing for an all-out war in Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah. It's absolutely nuts. This is so stupid. We're dealing with insane people. On Tuesday, the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, posted a statement on its X account saying that top commanders, and of course they wouldn't use nuclear weapons because the fallout would reach them, but saying that top commanders had signed off on battle plans for an offensive in Lebanon. Quote, the commanding officer of the Northern Command and the head of Operations Directorate approved operational plans, the IDF wrote. Plans for an offensive in Lebanon were approved and validated, and decisions were taken on the continuation of increasing the readiness of troops in the field. Well, isn't that just special? Just phenomenal, isn't it? But, of course, there are a few things that people might want to keep in mind. If you go to my Twitter/X feed, you'll probably see that I recently posted something from Aaron Mate that the United States is so concerned about the way things are going in the Middle East that they have chastised Israel. Okay? And Aaron Mate's brought up a very good point. He's saying the United States is speaking up about Israel. Really? Then why is the United States continuing to give them weapons? So let's go to the story at antiwar.com. We'll show you the story, and then I'll show you my quick comment on that. So if you go over to Antiwar, you'll see so many blue. So this is it. Biden scraps meeting after Netanyahu slams U.S. Oh, so clearly the United States is now standing against the Israeli genocide in Gaza and the Israeli warmongering against Hezbollah and Lebanon. Oh, maybe not. The White House canceled a high-level U.S. meeting with Israeli officials after Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu slammed the Biden administration for delaying arms transfers to Tel Aviv. I'm just demanding what's supposed to be coming to me, Daddy. The Israeli leader said he needed the arms to finish the job in Gaza. Well, maybe you can just get Nikki Haley to help him. Just give her a broom. I'm sure she'll be really good riding it around. On Wednesday, Axios reported that Israeli and U.S. officials said the White House was enraged by a video that Netanyahu posted the day before. The Israeli officials were en route to Washington when the Biden administration canceled the meeting. In the 1-minute video in English, the Israeli prime minister, you saw him, he blasted, and so on and so forth. After the video was posted to X, U.S. officials said they were unaware of what arms shipments Netanyahu was referring to. We, as you know, are continuing to review one shipment that President Biden has talked about with regard to 2,000-pound bombs because of our concerns about their use in a densely populated area like Rafah. But, you know, it's totally cool that they use all the other arms that we give them to kill people all over the place. And, yes, now go after Lebanon. Yeah, it's great. So the words and the actions don't match, obviously, except for the 2,000-pound bombs, and the Biden administration is just using it for cover. So as I mentioned on Twitter/X, I said, as anti-war and many perceptive observers have noted, this so-called pushback by Biden is meaningless because the administration still sends arms to IDF and Netanyahu. And then you see the headline there. So yeah, I think that's pretty valid to bring it up, and it's unfortunate that the Biden administration wants to make it look like they really care. In the meantime, they're funneling weapons of death on our tax dime. So we're going to continue looking at some of these big stories, and the next one I think is pretty key. Look at what's happening in New York City, and perhaps Jared Kushner helped promote this. Check this out.
New York now, where scuffles have broken out between rival protesters in Brooklyn amid an event hosted by a local Jewish group to auction off Palestinian land in the Middle East. Pro-Palestinian activists say New York's Jewish community is trying to sell stolen land in the West Bank. The so-called Great Real Estate event was organized by the My Home firm that's been touring the US and Canada. According to the United Nations Security Council, the construction of Israeli settlements on occupied Palestinian land is illegal and must be stopped. Pro-Palestinian activists have been especially outraged by such auctions recently being held at synagogues in both the US and Canada. Some of the land offers have even been posted for plots inside Gaza. Several Israeli government ministers have been calling for the Palestinian enclave to be settled by Israelis after the war. Well, let's now discuss this with Palestinian journalist Shadi Abdul Rahman joining us from Istanbul. Many thanks for joining us. It's good to see you today. So what else can you tell us about these auctions to sell Palestinian land?
Thank you for having me. This is a regular kind of auctions happening in United States and Canada, North America in general. They are selling the stolen lands of the Palestinian lands in the West Bank. And even if they can't sell Gaza, they will do that. They are giving the opportunity to those American and Canadian Jewish community who are living in United States and in Canada to come and live in West Bank as Israeli citizens in the lands which has been stolen. And they are even making auctions. And this is showing what kind of hypocrisy of the Americans to allow such an event happening on their lands while they are talking about that these settlements are illegal. So that means that they are letting this kind of auctions happening to sell stolen stuff in this situation. It is the stolen lands, and they are even worsening the situation and the Palestinian cause more and more, which is really on the other side. This event which happened and these clashes is showing what kind of more solidarity and more support for the Free of Palestine movement going on in the United States.
So pausing it right there. So this puts into, I think, a very stark microcosm and actually expands it for all of us to see and see what has been happening over decades in that area since the United States was involved with planting Zionist settlers into an area that ended up seeing these Zionist settlers taking land and then occupying Gaza. This right here, this is a perfect example. These people arguing on the streets, this is what happened in 1947. This right here, this is exactly what happened. They stole land and then they sold it to people. That's what happened. The last vestiges of British colonialism next to what was going on in India, right there. Continuing.
Wondering how such auctions are even allowed to be openly held in the US and Canada, considering that a UN Security Council Resolution 2334, which is internationally binding, ruled that the construction of Israeli settlements on occupied Palestinian land is illegal and must be stopped.
It's obvious that the United States of America is considering United Nations only and their resolutions and all what they decide only once it is serving their favors and serving their interests. But once it is Israel, it is a total new story. It is something else. Israel is above the law. Israel is never abiding in United Nations resolutions. We have seen during the past 8 months how many times the United Nations have taken resolutions and they called for the ceasefire, and they never approved that. We are looking that they are even talking about putting sanctions on some of the legal bodies of the United Nations. So Again, I'm saying this is the double standards. This is whenever United States think that this thing is serving their interest, they will support it. Otherwise, they will just ignore it. And this is what we are seeing in this situation.
Thanks for speaking to us today. It's great to get your thoughts on this. We've been talking to Palestinian journalist Shadi Abdulrahman in Istanbul. Thank you.
So I appreciate what the Palestinian journalist had to say. And also I appreciate, I can't believe back in there. He says, yep, exactly. He says, you hit it right on the money, Big G. Thanks, I can't believe. We have a lot more to discuss. And the final thing I want to give to you, I believe this is the final one that I want to give to you on the Israel-Gaza situation, has to do with their wondrous and awesome $350 million pier. Yeah. Because guess what? Now that the pier has been utilized to help move military vehicles in and then cause that strike against the refugee camp where guys got out of what was supposed to have been a food truck, but they were actually IDF soldiers hiding inside it. Yeah. Well, now that they've done that, and of course the pier isn't very good and swells over like a foot. Well, guess what? The U.S. is going to remove the aid pier from the Gaza coast, which supposedly had been set up because it would be so great rather than doing the simpler thing, which would be to just open up the gates. No, they couldn't do that on the ground. They had to spend $350 million and build a pier that they then use for military purposes and for very little food at all in any way whatsoever. So Will Porter writes this for antiwar.com. The structure has only been operational for about 10 days total since it was built off Gaza's coastline last month. The U.S. military could end a mission to facilitate aid shipments to Gaza using a temporary pier as early as next month, the New York Times reported, citing Pentagon officials. Aren't you glad you pay their salaries? The pier has faced constant problems since it was first established in May, including rough weather that has resulted in damage and shutdowns, although it wasn't necessarily really rough weather. Last Friday, the Pentagon announced that the structure would be towed to Ashdod, Israel, to avoid inclement weather. The second time it was withdrawn to the city due to high seas. Though U.S. officials have touted the pier as a way to deliver much-needed supplies to Gazans amid Israel's months-long bombing campaign, some humanitarian organizations have slammed the project as a farce. Gee, you don't say. You don't say. Oh, and by the way, if you follow my Twitter feed, let's just give a quick recap of something that you might have seen me retweet from Max Blumenthal. Remember, yesterday we mentioned that the gateway for refugees, where they're supposed to be able to check out and get into Egypt, was blown to pieces and burned to shreds, if you can say burned to ashes. Well, let me show you what Max has to offer here, because he nails it pretty darn well. He shows us more footage, and yeah, it's not a surprise. We saw some still shots, but here it is. Max has got it. More evidence of genocide. Israel gratuitously destroys the main crossing for humanitarian aid and exodus for refugees. And, you know, another area where food is supposed to come through. It's just a massive, massive, giant, deadly middle finger. They're showing people how little they care. It's absolute effrontery. This is a signal telling people we do not care anything about your agreements, about how humanitarian aid is supposed to get through. We are going to do everything we want to do there. This is our toy chest. This is our sandbox, right? We heard that yesterday. This is our plaything. This is what we will do. We can do anything we want because we own and run this place ever since the United States and the Western forces put us in here in 1947. We own it. And again, I'll just mention this to you. Again, going to Boston University, my last name Goldsmith, a lot of kids there who are Jewish. It's like 85% Jewish, most of them from Long Island. They're Zionist Jews, mostly not practicing Jews, but they're Zionist Jews, familial Jewish. They thought I was Jewish many times, so I would hear them say things about Palestine that I just couldn't believe, and it was exactly that kind of attitude. They could do anything they wanted there. It didn't matter. The people there weren't even human, and they could take the land. From the very start, that has been the attitude that I have heard pervasive within Zionist quarters. And believe me, I went to college at BU for 4 years. I heard that a lot. It was really nasty. I want to give you one other piece that I think you might find worthwhile from Glenn Greenwald. I posted this from Glenn Greenwald. It's an 8-minute piece. I just want to show you so you can find it on my Twitter feed. He says, this is from one of the guests that he had, a rabbi on, who opposes the Zionist moves there.
You that same question about your views of the Israeli actions in Gaza, and then specifically as well about this argument that, look, we were attacked on October 7th in a very brutal and violent way, and therefore we have no choice but to go after the people who did that, destroy their capacity to attack us in a similar way again. What do you make of the war itself and that specific justification for it?
Now, Zionism, not that I'm trying to answer for the ones who are supporting it, as you said, they come along in order to build their legitimacy. So they claim first that God gave them the land. It's not Netanyahu always his hypocrisy. They're non-religious. They don't keep the Sabbath, but he'll go in the United Nations and to the Congress and always make statements about that the Bible, how God gave us the land, and on and on. Which of course, as I say, repugnant and repulsive, ignoring the words of the Torah and the authorities of the Torah. But then he's always they use fear mongering, they use panic, they tell the world. They told the Jewish world that, we just suffered through Hitler and the Zion and the Palestinians, Muslim Palestinians are haters of the Jews, and they are to be equated or actually conflated with the Nazis, and therefore they want to destroy and kill the Jews, and you simply have to protect yourself. And many Jews, unfortunately, buy into their, and they have the most expensive PR firms. They have an endless well of money, and they therefore use that money to re-educate and to tell the Jews that the narrative of our coexistence with Muslims is totally, they disappear. It doesn't exist. What it is Muslims against Jews, Palestinians against Jews, and they're going to swallow the Jews alive if the land is given to them. So first, of course, as Rabbi Feldman said, their narrative is that it was a land without a people. But when people start questioning that, and they say there's full of people who are opposing what's happening, what's going on, what is the turmoil in Palestine and in Israel. So then they start saying, well, it's because it just happens to be some backward people, camel riding Bedouins or whatever, and they're haters of Jews. They don't countenance another people, and therefore they'll hate the West also. So
I'll pause it right there. That is exactly what I heard over and over again at Boston University. So it was just really awful. It was terrible to see. Now, want to now switch over into some big information about Vladimir Putin and Ukraine. So first, I want to give you this one on the war front. Yeah, we talk. Ukraine is now, it almost seems as if Ukraine has been, the government of Ukraine has been a creation, like a man-made, U.S. man-made scientific experiment, like, from the biolabs. And ironically, get this, Ukraine is going to get German-made Frankenstein tanks. Talk about Frankenstein. Yes. State-of-the-art guns will be grafted onto Cold War-era hulls to tackle swarms of drones and Russian missiles. They are ramping it up. There you go. Looks like the Killdozer from $6 Million Man, or the Venus probe, $6 Million Man. That is what's going on. The new Frankenstein air defense tank, designed to shoot down Russian drones and missiles, is to be supplied to Ukraine by a top German arms firm. Rheinmetall has announced it will mount its state-of-the-art Skyranger anti-aircraft system on Cold War-era Leopard 1 tank hulls, creating a new vehicle to bolster Ukraine's defenses. This is just unbelievably stupid. In the meantime, you know how the United States and NATO and the EU, they're all talking about making sure that they can hold on to the Russian assets, and use the so-called sanctions, otherwise known as theft, and then hold on to that money. And the great idea of Donald Trump, use the interests on the holdings of that to then funnel billions to Ukraine? Well, strangely, that comes at just around this time. Look at this from RT. Ukraine on the brink of default, a report from Reuters. Kyiv has failed to strike a deal with its international bondholders, according to a report. Oh, wait a minute. I thought that the money that the United States was going to give to Ukraine with, the interest on the Russian money that they're going to steal was going to be in the form of a loan. Remember that? That's what they said the past few days. It would be in the form of a loan and the Ukrainians could pay it back. But this came out on the 17th of June. Ukraine can't pay anything back. Oh, so wait a minute. So you're acting like the Federal Reserve does for the United States government, because the United States government is constantly in debt, and the debt grows by another $1 trillion every 100 days. So you're essentially doing what the Federal Reserve does for the United States in order to pay off the old bonds, because the U.S. government doesn't get enough money coming in from the massive tax machine it already applies onto us. It already runs us through. They have to buy more bonds. Federal Reserve buys more bonds, creates more money, depreciates the value of all our money out there and the buying power of it. So essentially, Ukraine's in the same position. They can't pay back the loans they already took. And so that's where this new money for Ukraine is going to be coming from. That seems to be why they're going to be doing that with the Russian asset thing. They want to create a constant flow of money going into Ukraine that they can use to pay off what they can't pay off right now. Amazing. This is amazing. Just the graft and corruption is so stark. The Ukrainian government announced on Monday. Did you hear anything about this? Reuters reported it. I didn't hear anything about it in the pop media. RT put it out there. And thank goodness for Reuters getting the information out. But they didn't tie it all together. The Ukrainian government announced on Monday it had failed to reach an agreement with a group of foreign bondholders. And get this. Oh, yeah, this is the other part that I wanted to mention. Guess who is going to be picking up the Ukrainian debt and will likely get paid off by by the Russian assets that get held. I forgot to mention this. That's right. So there are people who are ready to step in to buy up this Ukrainian debt, okay? And it's not the U.S. Federal Reserve. Who is it? The people who are going to be buying up the debt are BlackRock and PIMCO. They're going to be buying up $20 billion in Ukraine's debt. And then the U.S. holdings of the Russian assets will give the money to BlackRock. I almost forgot. I'm so glad that it's right in front of me on the article, but I read it yesterday when I put it out there. So, BlackRock and PIMCO on restructuring Ukraine's $20 billion in euro bonds, according to a report by Reuters. So that's it. BlackRock and PIMCO are buying up the debt. They're going to take it on, and then the U.S. government will then be able to facilitate Ukraine paying off BlackRock with the Russian assets. Man, oh man. In February 2022, bondholders granted Ukraine a 2-year debt freeze in view of the conflict with Russia, but that agreement ends in August, and bondholders are anxious for Kyiv to begin paying interest on its debt again. Well, that's where the creditors come in with BlackRock and PIMCO. $20 billion for BlackRock. That's the thing. I'm sorry I didn't put that out there beforehand, that little chunk. Yeah, so BlackRock's going to be making the money if the United States starts to hand that funnel of liquidity to Ukraine with the frozen Russian assets. Isn't that amazing? Thanks so much for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
This hour of Free Talk Live is brought to you by Dash Digital Cash. Dash is the cryptocurrency designed to be used for spending. Tired of the ever-inflating US dollar? You can live your life on Dash instead with some handy websites. BitRefill.com has been accepting Dash for years and has a ton of big-name retailers and brands, including grocers, gas stations, phone refills, Amazon, and even prepaid MasterCards. Plus, many of their gift cards are available at a discount. But what about paying your bills? Spritz.finance can do that, and they can send dollars to your bank account in case you still need those for some reason.